In the fifth season of South Park, aired during the summer of 2001, in the weeks before the world changed in ways no one anticipated, a street magician named David Blaine tells a crowd to watch closely as he pulls an ace of spades from a deck of cards. The crowd loses its mind. They do not applaud because the trick is impressive. They applaud because they want to believe that someone, somewhere, has access to knowledge they do not. That reaction, that desperate willingness to surrender autonomy to anyone who performs confidence convincingly enough, is the engine that drives every secret society South Park has ever examined across 27 seasons of television. The thesis of the show has never changed, not across changes in animation technology, not across the transition from cable to streaming, not across the departure and death of cast members, not across the show's own evolution from crude shock comedy to something that more closely resembles long-form investigative journalism rendered in construction paper. The thesis is this: it is not that secret societies are dangerous because they are powerful. It is that secret societies are dangerous because people are afraid of a world where nothing is in control. The danger is not in the society. The danger is in the need for the society, and that need is universal. South Park has spent more than 2 decades doing something no other animated series has attempted, with the same consistency. It has built, episode by episode and season by season, a unified theory of why human beings form cults, spread conspiracies, and submit to institutions that demand obedience in exchange for the illusion of order. The show does not approach these subjects with the wide-eyed credulity of a documentary or the smug detachment of a lecture. It approaches them the way a surgeon approaches a body on the table, with precision, with patience, and with the understanding that what you find inside is rarely what you expected. The tools the show uses are crude by design. The animation is deliberately primitive. The characters are constructed from simple geometric shapes. The voices are often performed by the same 2 men, and the humor frequently descends into territory that most prestige television would not touch. This crudeness is not a limitation, it is a strategy. The show uses the lowest possible aesthetic register to deliver the highest possible analytical content, and the gap between the two is itself a form of argument. The show is demonstrating through its own existence that insight does not require prestige, that the most important things can be said by the least respectable sources, that a cartoon about foul-mouthed children in a small Colorado town can see further and more clearly into the mechanics of human self-deception than any documentary, any investigative report, or any academic monograph. The medium is deliberately unimpressive. The message is not. This investigation covers 10 episodes and episode arcs spanning from 2001 to 2021. 2 full decades of television production during which the world changed in ways that made the show's arguments about secret societies more relevant with each passing year. It covers a fictional cult modeled on Scientology, a direct confrontation with the actual Church of Scientology, a surprisingly affectionate examination of Mormonism, a prescient deconstruction of 9/11's conspiracy theories, a real-world censorship crisis involving credible death threats, a Lovecraftian mythology that reframed one of the show's oldest-running gags, the only case where a secret society permanently altered the show's cast, a philosophical argument about cynicism as cult, and a pandemic conspiracy that sprawled across multiple seasons and streaming specials. Each chapter in this investigation builds on the ones before it. Each episode advances the same argument from a different angle. And the argument, when you see it whole, is more coherent and more disturbing than any individual episode suggests on its own. If you are enjoying this so far, subscribing to this channel is free and it genuinely helps us keep making these long videos. That is all. Back to South Park. The first time South Park took a direct swing at organized secret power was July 4th, 2001. Season 5, Episode 3. Super Best Friends. The episode opens with David Blaine performing magic tricks on a street corner in South Park, Colorado. And within minutes, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny have joined his organization. It is called Blaintology. The name is not subtle. It was never meant to be. What makes the episode remarkable even more than 2 decades later is not the parody itself, but the speed with which the boys surrender their autonomy. There is no prolonged recruitment process. There is no sophisticated manipulation arc spanning multiple encounters. There is no gradual erosion of their individuality through sleep deprivation or isolation or love bombing. Blaine performs a card trick, the boys are impressed, and by the next scene they are wearing robes and chanting in unison. The entire conversion happens in what appears to be a single afternoon. Trey Parker, who wrote and directed the episode, confirmed in multiple interviews that the primary target was the Church of Scientology specifically, but the mechanism on display is deliberately universal. The show is not arguing that Scientology has a uniquely effective recruitment strategy unavailable to other organizations. It is arguing that recruitment into any belief system follows the same fundamental pattern. A pattern so simple it can be initiated by a card trick on a street corner. Someone performs something that looks like competence. The audience mistakes competence for authority. Authority becomes obedience. Obedience becomes identity. And once belief becomes identity, leaving the group does not feel like changing your mind about a factual claim. It feels like annihilating yourself. Stan is the first of the four boys to recognize what Blaintology actually is. This is consistent with Stan's role throughout the entire run of the series. He is not the smartest of the four. That distinction belongs to Kyle, whose intelligence manifests as moral reasoning and argumentative skill. He is not the most ruthless. That is Cartman, whose intelligence manifests as manipulation and strategic cruelty. He is not the most mysterious. That is Kenny, whose hidden depths the show would not fully explore for another 9 years. Stan is the most observational. He occupies a specific narrative position within the group that the show maintains with remarkable consistency across hundreds of episodes. He is the character who watches. He is the character who processes what he sees without immediately converting it into an argument, a scheme, or a joke. He is the character most likely to look at a situation, strip away the rhetoric and the emotion and the social pressure, and say what he sees in plain language without filtering it through ideology, self-interest, or the desire to belong. This makes Stan the show's most natural protagonist for stories about deception and institutional manipulation, because he is the character most likely to notice that something is wrong before he can articulate what specifically is wrong about it. His objection to Blaintology is not intellectual. He does not construct a logical argument against the cult's claims. His objection is perceptual. Something feels wrong, and the show consistently validates this perceptual mode of understanding over the more articulate but more easily manipulated modes embodied by the other boys. When Stan tells Kyle that Blaintology is a cult, Kyle resists, not because Kyle is lacking in intelligence, and not because Kyle has failed to notice the same warning signs Stan has identified. Kyle resists because he has already invested emotional energy into belonging. The sunk cost of belief is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. More powerful than evidence, more powerful than logic, more powerful than the testimony of a trusted friend. The show understands this dynamic at a structural level, and it returns to it in nearly every episode about faith, conspiracy, and institutional loyalty. The resolution of Super Best Friends introduces one of the most controversial elements in the entire history of the series. When Blaine's cult grows powerful enough to threaten the town, Jesus Christ recruits a team of religious figures to stop him. The team is called the Super Best Friends, and its roster includes Buddha, Moses, Joseph Smith, Krishna, Lao Tzu, a character called Seaman, and Muhammad. Muhammad appears on screen. He speaks dialogue. He participates in the action sequences. He uses a power the show describes as fire manipulation. He is depicted as a heroic figure, a member of a team working to protect innocent people from a predatory cult. In 2001, this depiction was not controversial. Muhammad was drawn in the show's standard animation style, given dialogue, assigned a superpower, and presented as a force for good in the narrative. He appeared on screen for several minutes across multiple scenes. The episode aired on Comedy Central on July 4th without incident. No protests materialized, no network executives intervened. No advertisers pulled their support. Muhammad appeared on screen in a major American animated series, and the world continued to turn. This fact becomes enormously significant in the context of what happens 9 years later, but that part of the story belongs to a later chapter in this investigation. What matters here, in the context of the show's first major cult episode, is the structural argument that the Super Best Friends team represents. By assembling the founders of the world's major religions as a superhero team fighting a street magician's cult, Parker and Stone are making a specific and deliberately provocative claim. They are saying that every major religion began the same way Blaintology begins in this episode. Someone performed something that looked like a miracle. People gathered around the performer. A hierarchy formed among the gathered. Rules were established to govern the hierarchy. And eventually, over years and decades and centuries, the original miracle became irrelevant. What mattered was the structure that had been built around it. The building outlived the architect. This is not a novel observation in the academic study of religion. Sociologists and anthropologists have been making essentially the same argument for over a century. From Max Weber's analysis of charismatic authority and its routinization, to Emil Durkheim's theory of religion as a social fact rather than a metaphysical claim. What distinguishes the show's version of this argument is not its originality, but its accessibility. Academic sociology makes this case in dense prose to audiences of other academics. South Park makes the same case in 22 minutes to an audience of millions, using a superhero team composed of religious founders fighting a street magician's cult, The argument is identical. The delivery system is incomparably more efficient. And the fact that the delivery system is a cartoon, a medium culturally coded as trivial and childish, makes the argument's penetration into mainstream consciousness all the more effective, because the audience's defenses against being intellectually challenged are down. They tuned in to laugh. They did not expect to think. And the show uses that lowered guard to plant ideas that more respectable media formats could not deliver, because the audience would see them coming. The episode ends with Blaine defeated and his cult dissolved, but the show does not frame this outcome as a victory of rationality over superstition. The super best friends are themselves religious figures, founders of institutions that demand faith in claims that cannot be empirically verified. The boys are saved by faith, just a different and older brand of it. This is a critical distinction that separates South Park's approach to religion from most satirical treatments of the subject. The show is not atheist propaganda. It is not arguing that belief is inherently foolish or that religious people are inherently irrational. It is arguing that the structures humans build around belief are inherently dangerous, regardless of whether the underlying belief has merit, regardless of whether the founding miracle was genuine. The danger is not in the belief. The danger is in the architecture. The production details of Super Best Friends are worth noting for what they reveal about the show's creative methodology at the time. Parker and Stone wrote, recorded voice performances, and animated the episode in approximately 6 days, which was standard for South Park's production schedule during its early seasons. This compressed timeline, which was unusual for television animation and virtually unheard of for primetime animation, meant that the show's satire was always reactive, rather than predictive. It was pulling from the cultural moment, responding to what was happening in the world during the week of production, rather than attempting to anticipate what would be relevant months later when the episode finally aired. In 2001, the Church of Scientology was increasingly visible in American public life. Tom Cruise was arguably the biggest movie star on the planet. John Travolta's career had experienced a renaissance following Pulp Fiction. The organization's aggressive legal tactics against former members, journalists, and critics were documented in books and magazine articles, but not yet widely understood by the general public, who encountered Scientology primarily through its celebrity members. Super Best Friends accomplished something that most satire about cults and religions does not. It made the mechanics of cult recruitment visible without making them seem exotic or alien. By setting the cult in South Park, Colorado, a small and deliberately ordinary American town, among 4 ordinary 8-year-old boys, the episode stripped away the mystique that typically surrounds discussions of real-world cults. The typical cult narrative in American media follows a predictable structure: an isolated community, a charismatic and often sexually predatory leader, vulnerable adults, frequently those who have experienced trauma or displacement. South Park's version has none of these elements. There is no isolated compound. There is a street corner. There is no charismatic genius. There is a guy who can do card tricks. There are no traumatized adults searching for meaning. There are 4 children who thought the card trick was cool, and that was enough. That was the point. It does not take much. It has never taken much. The bar for cult recruitment is not set at the level of genius. It is set at the level of a mildly impressive performance. This observation connects to a body of psychological research that the show anticipates by decades. Social psychologists have documented what they call the minimal group paradigm, in which people will form group loyalties and exhibit in-group bias based on criteria as trivial as the flip of a coin or a preference for one abstract painting over another. The threshold for group formation is not high. It is almost non-existent. All that is required is a shared experience, however brief, and a label, however arbitrary. Blaintology provides both. The shared experience is watching the card trick. The label is the name itself. And from these 2 minimal inputs, the show demonstrates an entire social structure can crystallize in hours. Robes are donned, chants are memorized, hierarchies are established, and the boys, who entered the situation as individuals, with their own perspectives and their own capacity for independent thought, exit it as members, their individuality subsumed into the collective identity of the group. The speed of this transformation is not an exaggeration for comedic effect. It is an accurate depiction of how quickly group identity can override individual identity when the circumstances align. The Blaintology episode also established a formal template that the show would return to repeatedly over the following 2 decades. The template has 4 stages, and they recur with remarkable consistency across episodes separated by years and dealing with vastly different subject matter. First, an authority figure presents something that appears to be special knowledge, knowledge unavailable to the general public. Second, characters invest emotionally in that knowledge, incorporating it into their identity and their understanding of the world. Third, the special knowledge is revealed to be ordinary, fraudulent, or absurd, its specialness exposed as a function of presentation rather than content. Fourth, the characters must decide whether the emotional investment they have made was worth more than the truth they have discovered. This four-stage structure appears in nearly every South Park episode about secret societies, cults, and conspiracies. It is the show's skeleton key, the analytical framework it applies regardless of whether the subject is a street magician, a global religion, or a government agency. But Super Best Friends was only the beginning. The show would not hit its full stride on the subject of secret societies until 4 years later, when it turned its attention directly and by name to the most litigious religious organization in the United States, and discovered that some secrets do not simply sit there when you expose them. Some secrets fight back. The date is November 16, 2005. Season 9, Episode 12. The title is Trapped in the Closet. The episode begins with a premise so straightforward it could almost be a documentary. Stan Marsh is walking through South Park when he passes a Scientology center. A woman outside offers him a free personality test. Stan, who is 9 years old and does not have a strong opinion about personality tests, agrees to take it. The test, which closely mirrors the actual Oxford capacity analysis used by the Church of Scientology in its real-world recruitment operations, determines that Stan is depressed. A Scientology official examines the results, puts on a concerned expression, and tells Stan that the only way to address his depression is to pay for auditing sessions. The sessions use a device called an e-meter, which measures galvanic skin response. Stan agrees. He does not understand what galvanic skin response is. He does not understand what auditing entails. He simply trusts the authority of the person holding the clipboard. During his first auditing session, Stan scores so high on the e-meter that the officials become convinced he is not merely a new recruit, but the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology who died in 1986. This premise, seemingly absurd, allows Parker and Stone to accomplish something extraordinary from a narrative standpoint, because Stan is now considered the returned leader of the organization. Scientology's highest-level members travel to South Park to meet him. Among them is Tom Cruise. When Stan, in his capacity as the supposed reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, tells Cruise that he thinks the actor's performances are acceptable, but not particularly exceptional, Cruise retreats into Stan's bedroom closet and refuses to come out. The closet joke operates on multiple levels simultaneously, which is characteristic of South Park's best writing. On the most accessible level, it is a reference to the long-standing and widely circulated rumors about Tom Cruise's sexuality, rumors that Cruise has consistently denied. On a second level, it is a commentary on the relationship between celebrity and Scientology, the way the organization uses famous members as recruitment tools while simultaneously controlling their public images. On a third level, the closet is a structural metaphor for the organization itself, an institution whose most closely guarded beliefs and practices are hidden from public view, locked away behind payment walls and security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. The episode then does something that had never been done on mainstream American television before. It depicts the origin story of Scientology's cosmology in detail. On screen, while the narrative plays out in South Park's distinctive animation style, a caption appears in plain white text against a dark background. The caption reads, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." The caption is not played for comedic effect. It is not presented in an ironic font or accompanied by a laugh track. It appears in a standard typeface without any editorial emphasis. It simply states a fact. And the fact it states is that according to Scientology's own internal documents, which were leaked and subsequently confirmed through court proceedings, an alien dictator named Xenu brought billions of beings to Earth 75 million years ago, positioned them around volcanoes, and detonated hydrogen bombs. The disembodied spirits of those beings, called body thetans, attached themselves to living humans and are, according to Scientology doctrine, the source of all human suffering, mental illness, and spiritual contamination. The decision to display these beliefs on screen, with full visual depiction and no comedic exaggeration, represented a calculated editorial choice that distinguished South Park from every other mainstream media treatment of Scientology at the time. Newspapers and magazines, when they covered Scientology's beliefs at all, typically described them in cautious and heavily qualified language, acknowledging the organization's position while noting that the claims were contested or controversial. They hedged, they equivocated, they buried the specific details behind layers of journalistic distance. South Park did the opposite. It showed the beliefs in their entirety in animation on national television, with a caption that functioned as a direct challenge to the audience. We are not exaggerating. We are not editorializing. We are showing you what they believe. Your reaction is your own. The decision to present this material with the "This is what Scientologists actually believe" caption was not impulsive. Parker has explained in subsequent interviews that he and Stone discussed at length how to present the Xenu material, and concluded that the origin story of Scientology sounds so inherently implausible when stated plainly and accurately that no comedic exaggeration was necessary. The comedy was not in distortion. The comedy was in the gap between what the audience expected a religion to teach and what this particular religion actually teaches at its highest levels. This technique, presenting factual information about a subject and allowing the audience to draw their own conclusions without editorial guidance, became one of South Park's most effective and most frequently deployed satirical tools. It might be called the plain statement. The joke is that there is no joke. The reality is the punchline. Trapped in the Closet was nominated for an Emmy Award in the Outstanding Animated Program category for the 2005 season. It did not win. The award went to another program, but the nomination itself carried significance because it meant that members of the Television Academy, industry professionals with reputations and careers, had watched the episode, evaluated its artistic merit, and decided it deserved recognition alongside the best animated work produced that year. The nomination was a form of institutional validation that the Church of Scientology could not easily dismiss or discredit. The episode was also notable for a production decision that revealed genuine fear within the creative team and the broader production staff at South Park Studios and Comedy Central. Every name in the credits, both the opening credits and the closing credits, was listed as either John Smith or Jane Smith. No real names appeared anywhere in the episode's credit sequence. This decision was made to protect the production staff, from animators to recording engineers to network executives, from potential retaliation by the Church of Scientology, which has a thoroughly documented history of targeting critics through private investigators, frivolous lawsuits, infiltration campaigns, and sustained harassment operations. The organization's Office of Special Affairs, its intelligence and legal enforcement arm, had been the subject of multiple investigative reports and at least one major federal prosecution. The precaution was not paranoid or performative. According to multiple reports from journalists covering the entertainment industry and the Church of Scientology, the organization did in fact initiate an investigation into Trey Parker and Matt Stone following the episode's broadcast. The organization reportedly hired private investigators to examine the personal lives of both men, looking for compromising material, legal vulnerabilities, financial irregularities, or personal relationships that could be used to discredit them publicly or pressure them into silence privately. Parker later addressed this investigation with characteristic bluntness, saying that the investigators found nothing useful because, in his assessment, the worst things about him were already public knowledge. He had nothing to hide. This response is not merely a clever quip. It is a perfect encapsulation of the show's broader philosophy about secret societies. Transparency is a defense against organizations that rely on leverage derived from secrecy. If you have no secrets, there is nothing to leverage. If you have already said the worst things about yourself out loud, no one can threaten you with exposure. The contrast between Scientology's investigation of Parker and Stone and its outcome is itself a vindication of the show's thesis. The organization deployed its intelligence apparatus against two comedy writers and found nothing usable, not because the writers were saints, but because they had been doing the opposite of what Scientology does. They had been operating in public. Their controversies were public. Their personal histories, to the extent that they were interesting at all, were available to anyone with an internet connection. They had, in effect, inoculated themselves against the primary weapon of an organization that derives its power from the asymmetry between what it knows about its targets and what its targets know about it. When the asymmetry disappears, when the target has nothing hidden, the weapon becomes useless. It is a tactical demonstration of the show's own philosophical argument. Secrecy is not just morally corrosive, and transparency is not just morally virtuous. It is tactically sound. The Tom Cruise closet subplot generated its own real-world controversy that extended well beyond the episode's original air date. Reports circulated in entertainment media that Cruise had pressured Viacom, the parent company of Comedy Central, to pull the episode from the network's rerun rotation. Viacom initially denied that any such pressure had been applied, but the episode was temporarily pulled from the broadcast schedule in March of 2006, ostensibly to make room for a repeat of a different episode related to the departure of Isaac Hayes. The timing was suspicious enough that multiple media outlets, including the New York Times and various entertainment trade publications, connected the removal to Cruise's influence, either directly or through Scientology's institutional channels. What Trapped in the Closet accomplished, beyond its immediate comedic and cultural impact, was a fundamental shift in how South Park engaged with powerful institutions. Super Best Friends had used a fictional cult, Blaintology, as a proxy for Scientology and other real organizations. It attacked by analogy. Trapped in the Closet dispensed with analogy entirely. It named the Church of Scientology directly. It depicted its beliefs accurately, using the organization's own internal cosmology as its source material. It named real people, Tom Cruise and John Travolta among them. And it broadcast this material on a major cable television network during primetime hours to an audience of millions. The episode demonstrated that comedy could function as a form of investigative journalism, that an animated cartoon produced in less than a week could present factual information about a powerful institution that mainstream news organizations, with their larger budgets and their legal departments, had been reluctant to report because of the well-documented consequences of attracting Scientology's attention. The structural difference between the Blaintology episode and the Scientology episode is important and reveals an evolution in the show's approach. In Super Best Friends, the cult is defeated by external forces. The Super Best Friends, themselves religious figures with supernatural abilities, arrive and physically stop David Blaine through direct confrontation. The implicit message is that cults can be beaten by opposing power, that if you assemble enough force, you can dismantle the structure. In Trapped in the Closet, there is no such resolution. The episode ends with Stan renouncing Scientology and walking away, but the organization itself remains completely intact. Tom Cruise threatens to sue everyone in sight. The Scientology officials continue their operations. The credits roll with fake names. Nothing is resolved. Nothing is fixed. This is a more honest ending because it reflects the reality of how entrenched institutions actually function. You cannot defeat Scientology or any comparable organization with a single act of defiance, no matter how public or how brave. You can only make its internal workings visible to those who have not yet been recruited, and hope that visibility reduces the organization's ability to operate in darkness. The episode also introduced and refined a theme that would become absolutely central to the show's treatment of secret societies across the next 2 decades. The idea that the most effective weapon against institutional secrecy is not counter-secrecy, not infiltration, not espionage, but radical and uncompromising transparency. Stan does not infiltrate the Church of Scientology and steal classified documents. He does not recruit a mole inside the organization. He takes a personality test, scores high on a machine he does not understand, and the organization reveals its deepest secrets to him voluntarily, because its own internal procedures require it. The secret society destroys its own secrecy by following its own rules. This is not a narrative contrivance invented for comedic convenience. It is a precise observation about how closed systems actually fail in the real world. They fail because their internal logic, which seems coherent and self-sustaining when examined only from inside, cannot survive contact with outside scrutiny. The light does not need to be aimed. The cracks in the structure let it in on their own. But if Scientology represented the show's most aggressive and most consequential target, the subject that came next would demonstrate something entirely different. It would demonstrate that South Park was capable of intellectual and moral nuance, capable of distinguishing between a belief system's metaphysical claims and its adherents' moral character. And it would do so with a musical refrain that would eventually be expanded into one of the most commercially and critically successful musical theater productions in Broadway history. November 19th, 2003. Season 7, Episode 12. All About Mormons. The episode begins with a new family moving to the town of South Park. The Harrisons are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They are Mormon. They are also, without a single exception among their family members, the nicest people in town. They are kind to strangers. They are generous with their time and their resources. They are patient with rudeness and hostility. They are genuinely and visibly happy, not in the forced and performative way of people trying to convince others of their happiness, but in the quiet and settled way of people who have found something that works for them and are not particularly interested in debating its metaphysical foundations. This characterization creates an immediate narrative problem for the show and for its characters. Stan's father, Randy, tells Stan to beat up the new Mormon kid, Gary Harrison, because the family's relentless niceness is annoying. Stan attempts to comply but finds that Gary is genuinely impossible to dislike. He is friendly without being cloying. He is devout without being judgmental. He does not attempt to convert Stan or anyone else. He simply lives according to his beliefs and treats everyone he encounters with a respect that appears to be completely sincere. The episode intercuts this present-day storyline with an extended and historically detailed dramatization of the origins of Mormonism. The dramatization covers the life and claims of Joseph Smith, the founder of the religion, Smith claimed to have been visited by an angel named Moroni, who directed him to a set of golden plates buried in a hill near his home in Palmyra, New York. The plates were inscribed in a language Smith called Reformed Egyptian. Smith translated the plates not by reading them directly, but by placing seer stones in a hat, burying his face in the hat, and dictating the translation to a scribe. He could not show the plates to anyone because the angel had forbidden it. When Martin Harris, one of Smith's early financial backers and a scribe for the translation project, took 116 pages of the translated manuscript home to show his wife, the pages were lost. They were never recovered. Smith did not retranslate the same section to replace the lost pages. Instead, he claimed that God had instructed him to translate a different section of the plates, a section that covered the same historical period but from a different perspective. This conveniently eliminated the possibility that a retranslation of the same material would fail to match the original, which would have been devastating evidence against the authenticity of the translation process. Each time one of these details is presented in the episode, a choir sings a refrain. The refrain consists of the phrase, "dum dum 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 dum," repeated in a melody that mimics a reverent hymn. The wordplay operates on two levels. Phonetically, it sounds like a drum beat providing a solemn underscore to the historical narrative. Semantically, it reads as a judgment, dumb as in dumb. The show is calling Joseph Smith, and by extension anyone who accepts these claims without scrutiny, lacking in critical intelligence. The refrain is devastating in its simplicity, a single repeated syllable that transforms historical exposition into comedy without altering a single fact. It is also, and this is often overlooked in discussions of the episode, genuinely catchy. It lodges in the memory. Viewers who saw the episode when it first aired in 2003 can still hum the melody 2 decades later. This is not incidental. The show understands that information retention is driven by emotional and musical associations more than by logical argumentation. The dum 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 refrain ensures that anyone who has seen the episode will remember the specific historical claims attached to it. The golden plates, the seer stones, the lost pages, with perfect clarity because each claim is anchored to a musical hook that the brain cannot easily discard. The show is using the same mnemonic technology that religions themselves use, hymns, chants, repeated phrases, to embed its critique of religious claims into the audience's long-term memory. It is fighting the mechanisms of faith with the tools of faith. But the episode does not stop at mockery. If it had, if the dum 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 refrain were the final word, All About Mormons would be nothing more than a smug and ultimately shallow dismissal of a religious tradition held by millions of people. What makes the episode genuinely sophisticated, what elevates it beyond parody into something approaching genuine philosophical inquiry, is its ending. After the full history of Mormonism has been laid out in detail, with every implausible claim and every suspicious convenience given its own dum 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 refrain, Gary Harrison confronts Stan directly in a monologue that the show treats not as comedy but as argument. Gary acknowledges every factual criticism Stan has raised. He does not dispute the implausibility of the golden plates. He does not argue that seer stones in a hat constitute a credible translation methodology. He does not claim that the lost 116 pages situation is anything other than suspicious. Instead, he makes an argument that the show takes seriously, an argument that is given dramatic weight and emotional sincerity, and is not undermined by any subsequent punchline. He says that his family is happy. He says that his religion, whatever its historical origins, gives his family a framework for being good to each other and to their community. He says that if the choice is between believing something that sounds ridiculous on its face and having a family that functions with love, mutual respect, and genuine concern for the well-being of its neighbors, he will take the ridiculous belief every single time. And then he calls Stan a word that the show bleeps, a word that the audience understands without hearing it. This moment is crucial because it reveals the show's actual moral position on faith as a human phenomenon. South Park is not against belief. It has never been against belief, despite its reputation as an equal opportunity offender of religious sensibilities. The show is against belief that demands the cessation of thought. It is against belief that requires its adherents to stop asking questions, to stop examining evidence, to stop engaging with people outside the belief community. Mormonism, as depicted in the episode, asks its adherents to accept claims that are historically implausible, but it does not ask them to harass critics. It does not ask them to hire private investigators to dig up compromising material on journalists who write unflattering articles. It does not ask them to disconnect from family members who leave the faith. It does not ask them to threaten television networks with litigation for depicting their beliefs on screen. The distinction between Mormonism and Scientology in the show's moral framework is not about which set of metaphysical claims is more rationally defensible. Both sets of claims are presented as equally unsupported by empirical evidence. The golden plates are no more verifiable than the Xenu narrative. The seer stones are no more scientifically credible than the e-meter. The distinction the show draws is entirely about behavior. Mormons, in the show's telling, are good neighbors despite the implausibility of their beliefs. Their faith makes them kinder, more generous, and more community-oriented. Scientologists, in the show's telling, are hostile neighbors because of their beliefs. Their faith makes them litigious, paranoid, and retaliatory. This behavioral distinction matters enormously for the show's broader thesis about secret societies and what makes them dangerous. A secret society, the show argues through the juxtaposition of these episodes, is not defined by the secrecy of its beliefs. Every religion has esoteric elements, doctrines that are not immediately accessible to outsiders, rituals that require initiation, texts that require interpretation. A secret society is defined by the secrecy of its operations. Mormonism's origin story is available for public scrutiny. You can read about the golden plates, the seer stones, the angel Moroni, and the lost 116 pages in any library, in any bookstore, on any website. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not sue people who discuss these topics publicly. Scientology's origin story was, at the time these episodes aired, a closely guarded trade secret available only to members who had spent years inside the organization and paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to reach operating Thetan Level 3. The Church of Scientology actively litigated against individuals and organizations that published or discussed these materials. The difference between the two organizations is not what they believe. The difference is whether they allow the public to examine those beliefs before asking for commitment. Trey Parker and Matt Stone's creative engagement with Mormonism did not end with All About Mormons. 8 years after the episode aired, on March 24, 2011, The Book of Mormon opened on Broadway at the Eugene O'Neill Theater. The musical, written by Parker, Stone, and Robert Lopez, the songwriter behind Avenue Q, went on to become one of the most acclaimed and commercially successful productions in modern Broadway history. It won 9 Tony Awards at the 2011 ceremony, including Best Musical, Best Book of a Musical, and Best Original Score. It ran for over 6,000 performances on Broadway alone. Its worldwide gross exceeded $600 million. The Book of Mormon musical expands on the themes of the South Park episode, but adds a layer of genuine affection that the television episode only hints at. The musical follows 2 young Mormon missionaries, Elder Price and Elder Cunningham, who are assigned to a village in Uganda. Elder Price is handsome, devout, and confident in his faith. Elder Cunningham is overweight, socially awkward, and has never actually read the Book of Mormon, despite years of training. The musical's comedy derives from the collision between the missionaries' earnest and somewhat naive faith and the brutal reality of life in a community dealing with AIDS, warlord violence, female genital mutilation, and extreme poverty. Elder Cunningham, unable to remember actual Mormon doctrine, begins inventing stories that incorporate elements from science fiction films and comic books. The villagers, desperate for hope in any form, embrace these fabricated teachings and form a new and syncretic version of Mormonism that bears almost no resemblance to the original, but serves the same psychological and communal function. The critical and commercial success of the Book of Mormon created an unusual real-world dynamic. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, faced with a major cultural property that mocked its foundational narratives in front of sold-out audiences, 8 times a week, responded not with legal action, not with harassment, not with threats, but with a measured and arguably clever advertising campaign. The church placed advertisements in the playbill programs distributed to audience members at every performance of the musical, at every theater where the production ran, for the entire duration of the production's run. The advertisements read, "You have seen the show, now read the book." The message was simple, confident, and self-aware. It acknowledged the existence of the satire without engaging with its specific criticisms. It treated the musical not as an attack to be repelled, but as a marketing opportunity to be exploited. The church's response confirmed, more clearly than any analytical argument could, the distinction that South Park had drawn years earlier between Mormonism and Scientology. The Mormon Church, whatever the metaphysical implausibility of its founding narrative, responded to sustained and profitable public mockery with an invitation to learn more. It is genuinely difficult to imagine the Church of Scientology responding to a satirical Broadway musical about Xenu and body thetans with a playbill advertisement encouraging audience members to read Dianetics. The comparison between these episodes reveals the analytical framework that South Park applies to every institution it examines, religious or otherwise. The framework consists of 3 questions asked in sequence. First, does the institution allow its foundational beliefs to be examined openly by non-members and critics? Second, does the institution retaliate against individuals who publicly criticize or mock those beliefs? Third, does membership in the institution make its members better or worse neighbors to the people around them? By these three criteria, Mormonism passes 2 out of 3. Its beliefs are publicly available. Its members are, in the show's portrayal, exemplary neighbors. It fails only on the question of open examination, and even there, the church's response to the Book of Mormon suggests a higher tolerance for criticism than most comparable institutions. Scientology, by the same criteria, passes 0 out of 3. Its beliefs are hidden behind paywalls and security clearances. It retaliates aggressively against critics, and its institutional behavior toward non-members and former members has been documented in court proceedings, journalistic investigations, and congressional testimony as hostile, deceptive, and in some cases, criminal. There is one additional dimension of the Mormonism episodes worth examining before moving forward, because it reveals something about the show's understanding of how belief systems persist across generations. The Mormon kid Gary Harrison does not believe in the golden plates, because he has independently evaluated the evidence and concluded that Joseph Smith's claims are credible. He believes because his parents believe, and his parents believe because their parents believed, and so on back through generations to the original community of followers. His faith is inherited, not chosen. And the show treats this inherited faith with considerably more sympathy than it treats chosen faith. When adults evaluate the claims of a new religion and decide to join, the show holds them accountable for that decision. When children inherit the faith of their parents and grow up inside it without ever encountering a genuine alternative, the show recognizes that their relationship to the belief system is fundamentally different. They are not participants in a deception. They are products of one. This distinction between inherited belief and chosen belief runs throughout the show's treatment of religion and informs its moral judgments in ways that are easy to miss if you are only paying attention to the jokes. But South Park was not finished excavating the relationship between hidden knowledge and human behavior. The show was about to turn its attention away from religious institutions entirely and toward a different category of secret belief. Not the secrets of churches, but the secrets of governments. Not the hidden doctrines of organized religion, but the hidden mechanics of political power. And in doing so, it would produce one of the most intellectually rigorous and genuinely original arguments about conspiracy culture that American television has ever broadcast. An argument that would prove to be years, perhaps decades, ahead of the mainstream conversation about why people believe what they believe about the world's most powerful institutions. October 11th, 2006, Season 10, Episode 9, Mystery of the Urinal Deuce. The episode opens with a mundane mystery that has nothing to do with geopolitics or national security. Someone has defecated in a urinal at South Park Elementary School. Mr. Mackey, the school counselor with the distinctive vocal tic, is determined to identify the culprit. He addresses the student body with the gravity of a prosecutor presenting closing arguments in a capital case. The crime in Mackey's framing is not merely a violation of school bathroom protocol. It is an assault on the social contract. It is an act of anarchy. It demands justice. Meanwhile, in a parallel storyline that mirrors the bathroom mystery with deliberate structural precision, Kyle Broflovsky has been researching 9/11 conspiracy theories on the internet. He has watched videos, he has read articles, he has examined photographs with arrows pointing to anomalies in the smoke plumes and the structural collapse patterns, he has consumed the full catalog of material produced by the 9/11's truth movement, and he has arrived at a conclusion. The attacks were an inside job. The United States government orchestrated the destruction of the World Trade Center, the attack on the Pentagon, and the crash of United Airlines Flight 93 as part of a deliberate plan whose motives and mechanisms Kyle is still working to fully understand. The A plot and the B plot mirror each other with a precision that becomes more impressive the more closely you examine the episode's construction. Both are investigations. Both involve the fundamental question of responsibility, of who did a terrible thing and why. Both investigators, Mackey and Kyle, approach their respective mysteries with absolute certainty that the truth is discoverable through careful examination of evidence. And both investigations arrive at the same structural conclusion, though they reach it through very different paths and in very different emotional registers. The urinal mystery is eventually solved when it becomes clear that one of the students simply made a mistake. There was no conspiracy. There was no coordinated plot. There was no statement being made. Someone used the wrong fixture. The explanation is so mundane, so devoid of narrative satisfaction, that it barely qualifies as an explanation at all. And that is exactly the point. The September 11th storyline takes a turn that was, at the time of its broadcast, genuinely unprecedented in American popular culture. Kyle presents his conspiracy research to the class. He shows his evidence. He makes his case. Stan is skeptical but accompanies Kyle on an investigation. They follow the trail of evidence until they find themselves in a room with government officials, who appear to confirm the conspiracy. Yes, they say, the government did it. But then comes the twist that reframes the entire episode and arguably the entire cultural conversation about conspiracy theories. The government did not orchestrate 9/11. The government orchestrated the conspiracy theory about 9/11. The officials explain with a mixture of embarrassment and institutional pride that the idea of a government competent enough to plan the attacks, coordinate the logistics, execute the demolitions, manage the air traffic, silence the thousands of people who would need to be involved, and maintain the cover-up for years afterward is enormously flattering to the government. It makes the United States government appear omnipotent, omniscient, and ruthlessly effective. The truth, by contrast, is that a small group of terrorists exploited basic failures in a bloated, underfunded, poorly coordinated bureaucracy whose various agencies could not even share a database. The conspiracy theory makes the government look like an all-seeing supervillain. The reality makes the government look like a large office where nobody reads their email. The conspiracy theory is the conspiracy. This sentence, once you understand it, changes how you think about every conspiracy theory you have ever encountered. The government, the episode explains, promotes the belief that it is capable of massive coordinated deception, because the alternative, that it is capable of massive uncoordinated incompetence, is worse for the government's image and its ability to project authority both domestically and internationally. This reframing was years ahead of the mainstream cultural conversation about conspiracy theories and the psychological needs they serve. In 2006, the dominant critique of 9/11's conspiracy theories in mainstream media and political discourse was moral. The theories were disrespectful to the victims, they were unpatriotic, they were offensive. South Park bypassed the moral critique entirely and asked a structural and almost economic question instead. Who benefits? Who gains from the existence of this conspiracy theory? And the answer it arrived at was profoundly counterintuitive and, once articulated, difficult to unthink. The entity that benefits most from a conspiracy theory about government omnipotence is the government itself. This insight has only become more relevant in the 2 decades since the episode first aired. The proliferation of conspiracy theories about government surveillance capabilities, election manipulation operations, pandemic engineering programs, and weather control systems all share a common and usually unexamined assumption. They assume that the government, or some branch of the government, or some shadow government operating behind the visible government, is capable of coordinated, large-scale, technically sophisticated deception executed flawlessly across thousands or tens of thousands of participants over periods of years or decades without a single credible defection, whistleblower, or document leak. Anyone who has ever waited 4 hours in line at a government office to be told they need a different form, anyone who has watched a congressional committee spend 3 hours failing to understand how email works, anyone who has dealt with a municipal bureaucracy's filing system knows that this assumption is, to characterize it as generously as possible, ambitious. The episode makes this point with ruthless clarity but without cruelty toward the people who believe conspiracy theories. Kyle is not depicted as stupid for falling for the 9/11's theory. He is not mocked for his research or his conviction. He is depicted as someone who finds the alternative explanation, that the world is chaotic and uncontrolled, and that terrible things happen because of mundane failures rather than grand designs, to be psychologically unbearable. This is a compassionate reading of conspiracy belief that was uncommon in 2006 and remains uncommon now. The show argues that conspiracy theories are not primarily about evidence. The evidence is secondary. Conspiracy theories are primarily about emotional need, the need to believe that someone somewhere is in charge, that the suffering is intentional rather than random. Because intentional suffering, however evil, implies a world with structure, a world with agency, a world where things happen for reasons. And random suffering implies a world without any of those things. A world where 4 planes can be hijacked on a Tuesday morning for no reason that provides any comfort or resolution. It is worth pausing here to note how precisely the episode's emotional architecture mirrors the experience of actual grief, because this connection is central to the show's thesis about why conspiracy theories proliferate after traumatic events. The stages of conspiracy belief, as the episode depicts them, map almost exactly onto the stages commonly associated with grief. Denial that the official explanation is sufficient, anger at the institutions that failed to prevent the event, bargaining in the form of searching for alternative explanations that restore a sense of agency and control, depression when the search yields no satisfying answers, and acceptance, which in the case of conspiracy belief takes the paradoxical form of accepting the conspiracy theory itself as the new stable reality, because accepting the theory is less painful than accepting the absence of any satisfying explanation. The parallel between the urinal mystery and the 9/11's plot reinforces this argument through narrative structure rather than dialogue. Both mysteries begin with the same emotional impulse. Someone wants a satisfying explanation for an upsetting event. Both investigators pursue complicated theories involving premeditation and coordination. And in both cases, the actual explanation is disappointingly, almost insultingly simple. Someone used the wrong fixture. Someone exploited a security gap. There is no grand design in either case. There is only the ordinary, banal, and deeply unsatisfying human capacity for error, amplified by circumstance and undetected by systems that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of failure. Mystery of the Urinal Deuce also introduces a specific narrative technique that the show would deploy repeatedly in its subsequent treatments of conspiracy and secret knowledge. The technique involves presenting the conspiracy theory in its most compelling and internally coherent form before dismantling it through reframing rather than debunking. The episode does not strawman the 9/11's truth movement. It does not present a simplified or ridiculous version of the theory and then congratulate the audience for seeing through it. It gives Kyle real talking points, real footage, real questions that the official narrative of the attacks struggles to answer satisfactorily. It takes the theory seriously as an intellectual construction, and then it reframes those unanswered questions not as evidence of conspiracy, but as evidence of the human need for narrative coherence. The brain's inability to accept that something of that magnitude could result from something as mundane as institutional dysfunction. This technique is fundamentally more effective than simple debunking, because it respects the intelligence of the audience it is addressing. Simple debunking assumes that the audience believes the conspiracy because they lack information, because they have not seen the correct data or read the right report. South Park assumes the audience believes the conspiracy because they are human, and humans are pattern-seeking organisms who find randomness intolerable. By addressing the emotional and cognitive root of conspiracy belief rather than its factual claims, the episode achieves something that most media about conspiracy theories, whether documentaries or news segments or academic papers, consistently fails to achieve. It makes the viewer examine not the conspiracy theory, but their own relationship to the desire for narrative satisfaction. It makes you wonder not whether the conspiracy is true, but why you want it to be true. And that question, once asked, is far more destabilizing than any collection of evidence or counter-evidence. There is a moment in the episode that deserves close attention because it reveals the show's understanding of how conspiracy theories propagate through social networks in ways that have nothing to do with the quality of the evidence. When Kyle presents his 9/11's research to the class, the other students do not evaluate his evidence on its merits. They evaluate it based on Kyle's emotional conviction. He is passionate. He is certain. He has clearly invested significant time in this project. And for most of the students in the room, that investment of time and emotion functions as its own form of evidence. If someone intelligent and sincere has spent this much energy arriving at a firm conclusion, the conclusion must have some basis in reality. This is the social heuristic that drives the transmission of conspiracy theories far more effectively than any particular photograph or document. People do not evaluate claims in isolation. They evaluate claimants, and a claimant who appears to have done their homework, who speaks with conviction and can cite sources and reference specific details, is persuasive regardless of the quality of the underlying reasoning. The show understands that conspiracy theories are not primarily informational phenomena. They are social phenomena. They spread through trust networks, not evidence networks. And trust, unlike evidence, cannot be fact-checked. The episode also makes a subtle but important observation about what might be called the aesthetics of credibility. Kyle's presentation is visually structured. It features connections between events, timelines, references to official documents. The conspiracy theory looks like research. It has the surface characteristics of scholarly investigation, the apparent rigor, the organizational framework, the systematic accumulation of supporting detail. And this visual resemblance to legitimate research is itself a powerful persuasive force, completely independent of whether the analysis is actually sound. The show is identifying something that media literacy researchers would spend the following 2 decades trying to articulate for a broader public: that the visual language of authority and expertise can be mimicked by anyone with access to a search engine and a presentation tool. That a well-organized collection of nonsense is invariably more convincing than a disorganized presentation of truth, and that the tools which make it possible for anyone to produce material that looks authoritative have made the distinction between genuine expertise and performed expertise harder to detect than at any previous point in human history. The transition from religious secret societies to political conspiracies represents a broadening of the show's analytical framework, but not a departure from its core argument. In the Blaintology, Scientology, and Mormonism episodes, the secret knowledge is doctrinal. It consists of metaphysical claims about the nature of reality, the origin of the universe, or the architecture of the human soul. In Mystery of the Urinal Deuce, the secret knowledge is operational. It consists of factual claims about who did what, when, where, and why. But the underlying dynamic that draws people to both types of secret knowledge is identical. In both cases, the appeal of secret knowledge is not that the knowledge itself is compelling. The appeal is that possessing secret knowledge is psychologically rewarding. Knowing something that other people do not know makes you feel special. It makes you feel elevated above the ordinary. It gives you membership in an implicit community of the informed, the awake, the initiated. And that feeling of elevation and membership is addictive regardless of whether the knowledge that produces it is religious doctrine, political theory, or the name of the kid who used the wrong fixture in the school bathroom. But the show was about to encounter a situation where the carefully maintained boundary between fiction and reality, between the animated world of South Park, Colorado, and the actual world inhabited by its creators and its audience, would collapse entirely, where a real network of individuals operating outside mainstream society would issue real threats of physical violence against real people over a cartoon, and where the show's thesis about the power of transparency and the importance of saying things out loud would be tested not against a hypothetical adversary, but against the genuine and credible prospect of being murdered for drawing a picture. April 14th, 2010. Season 14, Episode 5. The title is simply the number 200. It is the 200th episode of South Park, and Parker and Stone designed it as both a celebration of the show's longevity and a deliberate provocation aimed at the single topic that American media, including South Park itself, had become most reluctant to address. The episode brings back nearly every celebrity the show has ever satirized, parodied, or insulted across its first 199 episodes. Tom Cruise, Barbra Streisand, Rob Reiner, Mel Gibson, Paris Hilton, Kanye West, Phil Collins, and dozens of others form an alliance. Their collective demand is simple and specific. They want whatever power protects Muhammad from being mocked on television. Because in the 9 years since Super Best Friends aired, a profound cultural shift had occurred. Muhammad had become the one subject, the one figure, the one image that South Park, and by extension the entirety of Western media, could not depict or satirize without risking consequences that went far beyond bad reviews or angry letters. The background to this shift is essential context without which the 200th episode and its sequel are incomprehensible. In September of 2005, the Danish newspaper Jyllands-Posten published 12 editorial cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. The cartoons were commissioned as a deliberate test of self-censorship in European media and culture. The publication triggered protests and riots across the Muslim world and in Muslim communities in Europe. Danish embassies in Syria, Lebanon, and Iran were attacked. An international consumer boycott of Danish goods was organized. More than 200 people died in violence directly connected to the controversy. Several of the cartoonists received death threats. One, Kurt Westergaard, survived an assassination attempt in his own home in January of 2010, just 3 months before South Park's 200th episode aired. By the time that episode reached broadcast, Comedy Central had already established an internal policy against depicting Muhammad in any form on any of its programming. This policy was never publicly announced or formally acknowledged. It existed as an understood constraint within the production team. Parker and Stone had tested this constraint in 2006 with the two-part episodes Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Cartoon Wars Part 2. These episodes, which also satirized the animated series Family Guy, included a subplot in which a fictional episode of Family Guy was set to depict Muhammad in a positive and innocuous context. The question the episodes posed was whether Comedy Central would allow the depiction to air. Within the narrative, the characters debate whether showing Muhammad is worth the risk of violent retaliation. Outside the narrative, the same debate was happening in real time between the creators and the network. Comedy Central censored the depiction. The episodes aired with a title card in place of the Muhammad scene, and the title card became part of the text, a piece of meta-commentary in which the act of censorship was itself incorporated into the show's argument about censorship. The Cartoon Wars episodes were, in retrospect, a dress rehearsal for the much larger confrontation that would come 4 years later. They established the stakes, they demonstrated the network's position, and they proved that Parker and Stone were willing to push the issue to the point of confrontation, even knowing they would lose. The show addressed this censorship within the episodes, creating a layered and somewhat dizzying meta-commentary in which a cartoon about the impossibility of showing Muhammad in a cartoon. The episode that aired contained a title card placed where the Muhammad depiction would have been, that read, "Comedy Central has refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on their network." Episode 200 works this accumulated tension into its narrative structure, with a precision that rewards close attention. The episode opens with a frame story in which the town of South Park is sued by Tom Cruise, who has gathered 200 other celebrities, each one a person the show has previously mocked, into a class action lawsuit. The celebrities do not want money. They do not want apologies. They want something more valuable and more specific. They want Muhammad. They want access to whatever force or property or spiritual mechanism makes Muhammad the one figure in Western culture who cannot be satirized without consequence. This is a brilliant narrative premise because it frames the prohibition on depicting Muhammad not as a religious commandment, but as a superpower. It is the power to be immune from mockery, and in the world of South Park, where every other figure from Jesus Christ to the Buddha to Santa Claus has been subjected to sustained and creative ridicule, this power is without precedent, and therefore enormously valuable. The celebrities, united in their desire for the power of being uncriticizable, determine that they must obtain Muhammad and extract his ability to deflect mockery. The boys must protect Muhammad from the celebrity mob. They do so by concealing him in a series of increasingly absurd disguises: a bear costume, a U-Haul truck, a mascot outfit, anything to prevent him from being visually depicted on screen. The episode ends on a cliffhanger, with the resolution promised for the following week. Between the broadcast of episode 200 on April 14th and the broadcast of episode 201 on April 21st, something happened that transformed both episodes from television satire into a case study in the real-world mechanics of suppression and fear. A website called revolutionmuslim.com, operated by individuals in New York City, posted a statement about the episode. The statement was not a review. It was not a critique. It was a warning. It included the addresses of Comedy Central's corporate offices and the production offices of South Park Studios. It included a photograph of Theo Van Gogh, the Dutch filmmaker and great-grandnephew of the painter Vincent van Gogh, who had been murdered on an Amsterdam street in November of 2004 by an Islamist extremist after making a short film critical of the treatment of women in Islam. Van Gogh was shot, stabbed, and nearly decapitated. A note was pinned to his body with a knife. The Revolution Muslim statement said that Parker and Stone would probably wind up like Theo Van Gogh. The distinction between a prediction and a threat, in this specific context and accompanied by this specific photographic reference, was a distinction without meaning. Episode 201 aired on April 21st, 2010, but what American television audiences saw that night was not what Trey Parker and Matt Stone had written, produced, and intended to broadcast. Comedy Central had censored the episode extensively and without the creators' consent. Every instance of Muhammad's name in the episode's dialogue was covered by an audio bleep, the same bleep used to obscure profanity. Muhammad's image, which had already been concealed within the narrative through the various disguises, remained concealed, but the most significant act of censorship was applied to Kyle's closing speech, the speech that traditionally delivers the moral of the episode. Kyle's speech was entirely bleeped, from beginning to end, every word covered by a continuous audio tone. The speech, according to Parker, was not about Muhammad. It was not about Islam. It was not about religion at all. The speech was about intimidation. It was about the tactical effectiveness of threatening people with violence. It argued that the lesson of the entire two-episode arc, the lesson demonstrated by both the fictional plot and the real-world events surrounding the episodes, was simple and terrible. Threats work. If you threaten violence against people who say things you do not want said, the institutions that employ those people will silence them on your behalf. You do not need to carry out the violence. You only need to make the threat credible enough to activate the institutional instinct for self-preservation. Comedy Central, by censoring the speech about how threats lead to censorship, proved the speech's thesis in the act of suppressing it. The irony was total, structural, and devastating. A speech about the power of violent intimidation to produce censorship was itself censored because of violent intimidation. The show had constructed a perfect closed loop in which the medium became the message in the most literal sense the phrase has ever carried. The censorship was not imposed despite the speech's argument. The censorship was imposed because the speech's argument was correct, and its correctness made the argument dangerous in a way that no amount of vulgarity or blasphemy had ever been. Parker later said that the experience was the most frustrating of his entire career. not because of the threats from Revolution Muslim, which he and Stone had anticipated and accepted as a possible consequence, but because of Comedy Central's response. The network had broadcast hundreds of episodes containing graphic violence, explicit sexual content, racial slurs, and attacks on every conceivable demographic, religious, and political group in American life. But when faced with a credible threat, the network chose the speech about threats as the thing it could not air. Both episodes, 200 and 201, were pulled from streaming platforms and have never been made officially available through any digital distribution channel. They cannot be purchased on iTunes. They cannot be viewed on HBO Max or Paramount Plus or any other streaming service that carries the South Park catalog. They cannot be rented or bought through Amazon, Google, or any other digital storefront. They are, for all practical purposes, erased from the show's official history. This makes them the most thoroughly suppressed episodes in South Park's 27-year run, surpassing even the original Super Best Friends episode, which was also eventually removed from streaming platforms because it contained a visual depiction of Muhammad. The significance of the 200 and 201 arc for the show's broader thesis about secret societies is difficult to overstate. In every previous episode about cults, religions, conspiracies, and institutional power, the secret society in question was fictional, or at least substantially fictionalized. Blaintology was a transparent parody. The Scientology episode used real names and real doctrines, but operated within the protective framework of satirical comedy. The Mormon episode was more affectionate than aggressive. The 9/11's episode was a purely analytical thought experiment. Episodes 200 and 201 were categorically different. They provoked a response from an actual real-world network of individuals who were willing to use the credible threat of lethal violence to suppress speech they found objectionable. And they demonstrated in real time and on a national stage that the suppression worked exactly as the show predicted it would. This is the only case in South Park's history where the show's thesis about how secret societies and authoritarian networks maintain power was proven correct by the reaction to the show itself. The thesis of episodes 200 and 201 was that fear is a more effective censoring mechanism than any government agency, any corporate policy, any broadcast standard, or any audience complaint. Comedy Central did not censor the episodes because they violated the network's content guidelines. They censored the episodes because they were afraid. And the fear was rational. Theo Van Gogh was dead. The threat referenced his murder explicitly. The network made a calculation that the speech was not worth a human life. The 200th episode arc also revealed a fracture within the show's own creative structure. Parker and Stone wanted the episodes to air uncensored. Comedy Central refused. The creators of a show about the fundamental importance of saying things out loud, of transparency as the antidote to authoritarian control, were silenced by the network that employed them. When the creators later negotiated a new deal with Paramount that included streaming specials and significantly expanded creative control, the terms reportedly included provisions specifically designed to prevent a repeat of the 200 and 201 situation. The censorship of those episodes did not just damage two pieces of television, it reshaped the business relationship between the show and its network for over a decade. There is one more dimension of the 200 and 201 crisis that deserves attention, because it reveals something about the nature of suppression that the show itself could not have anticipated. In the years since the episodes were pulled from official distribution, they have become the most sought-after episodes in the show's catalog. They circulate on unofficial sites. They are discussed in forums with the hushed reverence typically reserved for lost films or banned literature. The act of suppression transformed 2 episodes of a cable cartoon into forbidden texts, objects of fascination precisely because they were hidden. The secret society's tactic, removing the episodes from public access, accomplished the opposite of its intended effect. It gave the episodes more cultural weight than they would have carried if they had simply aired, generated their controversy, and joined the catalog alongside the other 290-plus episodes. The suppression became the story. The absence became the evidence. This dynamic in which the act of hiding something makes it more visible and more significant than it would have been if left alone is itself one of the central mechanisms the show has spent decades analyzing. Secrecy generates interest. Censorship generates curiosity. And the attempt to make something disappear is often the most effective way to ensure that it never does. The fall of 2010 brought the show back to fictional territory, but the fiction was informed by the real-world events of the preceding months. Season 14, episodes 11 through 13. The Coon Trilogy. Coon 2 Hindsight. Mysterion Rises. Coon vs. Coon and Friends. The trilogy begins with Eric Cartman operating as his self-appointed superhero alter ego, the Coon. attempting to lead a team of child superheroes called Coon and Friends. The team includes Kenny as Mysterion, Stan as Toolshed, Kyle as the Human Kite, Clyde as Mosquito, Token as Tupperware, Timmy as Iron Maiden, and Jimmy as Fastpass. The real-world backdrop is the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which had begun in April of 2010 and was still ongoing during the episode's production. The spill was the largest marine oil spill in the history of the petroleum industry. An estimated 4.9 million barrels of oil were released into the Gulf of Mexico over the course of 87 days. 11 workers were killed in the initial explosion. The environmental damage was catastrophic and in many respects irreversible. BP, the company responsible, became the subject of intense public anger, congressional hearings, and ultimately a settlement of over $65 billion. BP is depicted in the show not as a negligent corporation that cut safety corners to increase profit margins, which is what actually happened, but as having accidentally drilled through the floor of the ocean into another dimension entirely, releasing the Lovecraftian elder god Cthulhu into the physical world. This exaggeration serves the same function as the show's treatment of 9/11's conspiracy theories. The truth about the Deepwater Horizon disaster, that a corporation prioritized quarterly earnings over maintenance schedules and safety protocols, and that regulatory agencies tasked with oversight had been effectively captured by the industry they were supposed to regulate, is banal. It is the boring, systemic, unsexy truth about how most disasters actually occur. The show replaces this banal truth with a spectacular one, and in doing so, it highlights by contrast how unsatisfying the real explanation is, and how much the human mind craves something more dramatic, more intentional, and more narratively complete than institutional negligence. The Cthulhu element is not arbitrary mythology selected for visual spectacle. It connects to an established but previously unexplained thread in the show's internal mythology that stretches back to the very first season. Kenny McCormick has died and returned to life in nearly every episode of the show's first 5 seasons, and intermittently throughout the remaining seasons. His deaths have varied from the mundane to the spectacular. He has been crushed, burned, impaled, eaten, electrocuted, frozen, and dismembered. Each time he returns in the next episode with no explanation and no acknowledgement from the other characters that anything unusual has occurred. The show treated this recurring death as a running gag, a reliable source of dark comedy that required no explanation because the audience understood it as a convention of the show's format rather than a plot point requiring resolution. The Coon trilogy changes this. It provides an explanation for Kenny's immortality, and the explanation is rooted in the mythology of secret societies. Kenny's parents, Stuart and Carol McCormick, were members of a Cthulhu cult. They attended cult meetings, they participated in rituals invoking the elder god. And Kenny's ability to die and return to life, an ability that causes him genuine suffering because he experiences every death fully and retains the memory of each death even though no one around him remembers that he died, is a direct consequence of his parents' involvement in the cult. Kenny did not choose this power. He did not seek it. It was imposed on him before birth by decisions his parents made, decisions rooted in their participation in a secret organization whose purposes and practices they almost certainly did not fully understand. This revelation operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface level, it is a characteristically South Park joke, an absurdly elaborate supernatural explanation for what had been treated for 14 seasons as a simple running gag. But beneath the joke is a serious and genuinely affecting thematic statement about the intergenerational consequences of secret society membership. Kenny's immortality is not a gift. It is a curse. He experiences every death in full sensory detail. He feels the pain of being crushed, burned, or torn apart. He retains the memory of each death even as the world around him resets and forgets. And the source of this curse is not anything Kenny did. It is something his parents did. The show's most concentrated metaphor for what secret societies actually do to their members and their members' families is contained in this revelation. Secret societies offer access to hidden power. The power in the Coon trilogy is literally real. Kenny can genuinely return from death. But the power does not serve the person who possesses it, it serves the structure that granted it. And the cost of possessing it is borne not by the organization or its leaders, but by the individual member and, in this case, by that member's child. Cartman's arc in the trilogy provides the essential counterpoint. When Cthulhu is summoned into the physical world, most characters react with appropriate terror. Cthulhu is an elder god, a being of incomprehensible cosmic power whose very existence challenges the foundations of human understanding. Cartman does not react with terror. Cartman recognizes Cthulhu as a tool. He does not worship the elder god. He does not fear the elder god. He does not attempt to understand the Elder God's nature or purposes. He befriends Cthulhu the way a manipulative child befriends a large and not particularly intelligent dog, with the assumption that the creature will follow commands in exchange for attention and affection. Cartman uses Cthulhu to destroy his personal enemies, to banish people he dislikes to dark dimensions, and to generally impose his narcissistic will on the world around him. This dynamic is the show's most direct commentary on the relationship between sociopathy and institutional power. Secret Societies, the Coon trilogy, argues through its characterization of Cartman's relationship with Cthulhu, attract two fundamentally different types of people. The first type genuinely believes in the hidden knowledge the organization claims to possess. These are people like Kenny's parents. People who are drawn to the cult by a sincere desire for transcendence, for contact with something larger than their ordinary lives. The second type sees the hidden knowledge as a mechanism for personal advancement, a lever to be pulled in service of ambition. These are people like Cartman, people who are drawn to the cult not by belief, but by the recognition that the cult's power can be redirected to serve their own purposes. The first type becomes a victim of the organization. The second type becomes its leader. The Lovecraftian framework is particularly well chosen for this commentary because of what Lovecraft's original fiction is actually about, underneath the tentacles and the unpronounceable names. Lovecraft's stories are about the encounter between human consciousness and truths that are too large, too alien, and too fundamentally incompatible with human cognition for the mind to process without breaking. The classic Lovecraftian protagonist encounters forbidden knowledge and goes mad. The knowledge itself is the weapon. South Park inverts this dynamic. Kenny encounters forbidden knowledge, the knowledge of his own immortality and its source, and suffers not madness, but isolation. He knows something no one else knows. He experiences something no one else experiences, and he cannot share it because no one will believe him or even remember the evidence. Cartman encounters the same forbidden knowledge and experiences no suffering at all because suffering requires empathy, and Cartman has none. The Coon trilogy draws a direct line between the mechanics of Lovecraftian cosmic horror and the mechanics of real-world authoritarian structures, in a way that is more intellectually ambitious than most analyses of Lovecraft produced by academic literary criticism. Lovecraft's fiction operates on a fundamental premise that the universe contains truths incompatible with human sanity. The encounter with these truths, whether through ancient texts or dimensional rifts, or the direct perception of entities beyond human comprehension, destroys the mind's ability to function within ordinary reality. The typical Lovecraft protagonist does not defeat the cosmic horror. The typical Lovecraft protagonist goes insane, and the insanity is permanent. South Park takes this premise and subjects it to the same analytical scrutiny it applies to every other belief system. It asks a simple question: what if the response to incomprehensible cosmic truth is not madness, but a choice? What if the encounter with forbidden knowledge does not determine your fate, but reveals your character? Kenny encounters the forbidden truth of his own immortality and responds with suffering because he is capable of empathy. He feels his own deaths. He feels the isolation of knowing something no one else will believe. He carries the weight. Cartman encounters essentially the same forbidden truth: the existence of Cthulhu and the reality of dimensions beyond ordinary perception, and responds with opportunism because he is incapable of processing experience through any lens other than personal advantage. The forbidden knowledge does not make either of them mad in the Lovecraftian sense. It makes them more fully themselves. And the show argues through this contrast that secret knowledge does not transform people. It amplifies what is already there. The trilogy also represents a structural innovation in the show's treatment of secret societies. For the first time in the series, the secret society is not a phenomenon contained within a single episode, or even a 2-episode arc. The Cthulhu cult has existed in the background of the show for 14 years. Kenny's deaths, which had been treated as isolated episodic events with no connection to each other or to any larger narrative, are retroactively reframed as evidence of an ongoing supernatural conspiracy that has been operating since before the show's first episode. The most dangerous secret societies, the show argues through this structural choice, are not the ones that announce themselves through dramatic confrontation. They are the ones that operate in the margins of ordinary experience, invisible to everyone who is not directly affected by them, detectable only in retrospect when someone assembles the scattered evidence into a coherent picture. But while the show was constructing its elaborate fictional mythology of elder gods and immortal children, a real-world drama had been unfolding since 2005 that would demonstrate, more clearly and more painfully than any fictional narrative possibly could, what happens when a secret society retaliates directly against those who expose it. And this particular story does not end with a punchline. Isaac Hayes joined the cast of South Park in 1997, voicing the character of Jerome Chef McElroy. Chef was the cafeteria worker at South Park Elementary School, the one adult in town the boys trusted without reservation, the one who answered their questions about life and relationships, and the confusing adult world with musical numbers delivered in Hayes' unmistakable baritone. Hayes brought genuine warmth, musicality, and emotional authenticity to the role. His voice, deep and resonant and unhurried, gave Chef an authority and a kindness that none of the show's other adult characters possessed. Randy Marsh was buffoonish. Gerald Broflovsky was self-righteous. Mr. Garrison was unhinged. Chef was solid. Chef was real. For 9 seasons and 136 episodes, he was the emotional anchor of the show's adult cast. Isaac Hayes was also a member of the Church of Scientology. He had joined the organization in the early 1990s and was by every available account a committed, enthusiastic, and publicly visible member. During the first 9 seasons of South Park, the show mocked, attacked, satirized, and ridiculed nearly every religion, political ideology, cultural movement, and social institution in American life. It mocked Christianity in dozens of episodes. It mocked Judaism, it mocked Islam, it mocked Mormonism, it mocked Catholicism, it mocked agnosticism, it mocked environmentalism, consumerism, conservatism, liberalism, and every shade of political opinion in between. Hayes participated in all of it. He recorded his voice performances, he cashed his checks, he attended promotional events. He did not publicly object to any of it, not once, not to any target, until the show mocked Scientology. In November of 2005, Trapped in the Closet aired. In March of 2006, 4 months later, Isaac Hayes announced through a public statement that he was leaving South Park. The statement, issued through his publicist, cited the show's intolerance and bigotry toward religious beliefs as the reason for his departure. This explanation struck many observers, including Parker and Stone, as strikingly inconsistent with Hayes' 9-year track record of enthusiastic participation in a show whose defining characteristic was intolerance and bigotry toward everything. The circumstances of Hayes' departure became substantially clearer in the years that followed his death. Isaac Hayes III, his son, stated in a 2016 interview that his father did not personally make the decision to leave South Park. According to the younger Hayes, his father's representatives within the Church of Scientology made the decision on his behalf and issued the public statement without his meaningful input or consent. Isaac Hayes had suffered a stroke in January of 2006, approximately 2 months before his departure from the show was announced. His son's account suggests that Hayes was not in a condition to make significant professional decisions at that time, and that Scientology officials, acting in what they characterized as his best interests but what functioned as the organization's institutional interests, terminated his involvement with a show that had attacked the organization. If this account is accurate, and no party with direct knowledge of the events has contradicted it, then the Isaac Hayes situation represents the most direct, tangible, and consequential example of a secret society altering the trajectory of South Park. A religious organization, acting through representatives who held authority over a member's professional affairs during a period of medical vulnerability, removed a core cast member from a television show because the show had depicted the organization's beliefs accurately on national television. This is not interpretation, this is not inference, this is what happened. Parker and Stone responded in the Season 10 premiere, which aired on March 22, 2006, less than 2 weeks after Hayes' departure was announced. The episode is titled The Return of Chef. In the episode, Chef returns to South Park after an extended absence, during which he has been traveling with an organization called the Super Adventure Club. The Super Adventure Club is a thinly veiled and deliberately unsubtle reference to Scientology. Chef's dialogue throughout the episode is constructed entirely from audio clips, spliced together from his performances in previous seasons. Hayes did not record new material for the episode. The spliced dialogue, assembled from fragments of lines recorded in completely different contexts over the preceding 9 years, makes Chef say increasingly inappropriate and eventually disturbing things, as the Super Adventure Club's brainwashing progressively overrides his personality. The episode ends with Chef's death, and the death is neither quick nor dignified. Chef falls off a bridge. He is impaled on a tree branch. While impaled, he is mauled by a mountain lion. While being mauled, he is attacked by a grizzly bear. His body catches fire, he soils himself. The scene is extended and graphic, far more violent than the typical South Park death, which tends to be sudden and played for shock. Chef's death is drawn out and cruel. It is clearly intended not as comedy, but as an expression of genuine anger and grief. Anger at the organization Parker and Stone held responsible for losing a friend and colleague, and grief for a character they had created and cared about for nearly a decade. The episode's final scene shows Chef's body being recovered by the Super Adventure Club, who used their technology to reanimate him as a figure reminiscent of Darth Vader, alive but no longer himself, his identity subsumed by the organization that claimed him. This image, a beloved character reduced to a hollow vessel serving an institution that destroyed who he was, is the show's most emotionally potent statement about the human cost of secret society membership. Parker made a public statement at the time of the episode's broadcast that drew a careful and deliberate distinction between Isaac Hayes the person and the Church of Scientology the institution. He said that he and Stone did not blame Hayes for leaving the show. They blamed Scientology for taking him away. This distinction is perfectly consistent with the moral framework the show had been building across its treatment of various belief systems. The show's anger, its satirical firepower, is never directed at individuals who are trapped within systems of institutional control. It is directed at the systems themselves, at the structures that use loyalty and obligation and identity as mechanisms of coercion. The timeline of events is important and worth laying out precisely because the timeline itself is evidence. In November of 2005, Trapped in the Closet aired. In January of 2006, approximately 2 months later, Isaac Hayes suffered a stroke that significantly impaired his cognitive and communicative abilities. In March of 2006, approximately 2 months after the stroke, a public statement was issued in Hayes' name announcing his departure from the show and citing religious bigotry as the reason. In late March of 2006, The Return of Chef aired, killing the character permanently. Hayes' son has stated that his father did not write, approve, or authorize the March statement. If this chronology is accurate, and no one with first-hand knowledge has disputed it, then the Church of Scientology exploited a medical emergency, a period during which one of its members was physically incapable of advocating for his own interests, to sever that member's relationship with individuals and institutions that had criticized the organization. The word for this, in contexts that do not involve religious institutions, is exploitation. The fact that it occurred within the framework of a religious organization does not change what it is. It merely changes what it is called. Isaac Hayes died on August 10, 2008, at the age of 65. The cause of death was a stroke, related to the health issues he had been experiencing since his earlier stroke in 2006. The show never directly addressed his death within an episode. It did not need to. Chef's absence from every subsequent season, the empty space where his voice and his warmth had been, served as a permanent and visible reminder of what the confrontation with Scientology had cost. The Isaac Hayes episode is the single most important real-world data point in South Park's quarter-century engagement with the subject of secret societies. It demonstrates that the show's satire is not consequence-free. It demonstrates that secret societies do not limit their responses to legal threats, public relations campaigns, or letter-writing efforts. They respond by controlling their own members by activating the bonds of loyalty, obligation, identity, and dependency that membership creates, and using those bonds to silence dissent, punish association with critics, and ensure institutional continuity regardless of the cost to individual members. Hayes was not a critic of Scientology who was punished for speaking out against the organization from outside. He was a member who was prevented from continuing a professional relationship with people who had criticized the organization. The mechanism of control was not external pressure applied against an adversary. It was internal pressure applied against a member. And that internal mechanism, the show has argued repeatedly and consistently across its entire run, is the most effective and the most frightening form of power a secret society can wield. External enemies can be fought. Internal control can only be escaped, and the escape always costs more than the person escaping expects to pay. The deeper lesson of the Isaac Hayes situation is about the nature of institutional control as opposed to interpersonal control. A cult leader controls individual members through personal charisma, emotional manipulation, and direct psychological pressure. An institution controls its members through something more abstract and therefore more durable. It controls them through identity. Hayes was not being personally threatened by a cult leader. He was being managed by an organization that had become inseparable from his sense of who he was. The Church of Scientology was not just something he belonged to. It was, after more than a decade of membership, part of how he understood himself. Leaving the organization would not have been a simple professional decision. It would have been an act of self-demolition, a repudiation of years of investment, relationships, and publicly stated convictions. The organization did not need to threaten him. It only needed to be who he was. And once an institution has achieved that level of integration with a member's identity, the member's compliance is not coerced. It is automatic. This dynamic identity as the mechanism of institutional control connects directly to the Blaintology template the show established in its very first cult episode. The boys join Blaintology not because they are threatened, but because belonging feels good. They resist leaving not because they are imprisoned, but because leaving would mean admitting they were fooled. The sunk cost is not financial, it is psychological. And the longer the membership continues, the higher the psychological cost of exit becomes, because each additional day of membership is another day's worth of identity that must be retroactively reinterpreted as error. This is why people stay in organizations long after the organizations have ceased to serve their interests. The cost of staying is high. The cost of leaving, measured in identity rather than money, is higher. The loss of Chef also revealed something about the show's institutional resilience that mirrors its thematic arguments about the superiority of open systems over closed ones. South Park absorbed the permanent loss of one of its central and most beloved characters without fundamentally altering its identity or its willingness to engage with controversial subjects. The show did not soften its treatment of Scientology in subsequent seasons. If anything, the treatment became more pointed, more specific, and more directly connected to the real-world behavior of the organization rather than its cosmological beliefs. The message was communicated clearly through the show's continued existence and continued aggression. You can take our chef. You cannot take our voice. There is a broader observation to make about the Isaac Hayes situation before moving on, an observation that connects his story to every other chapter in this investigation. The Church of Scientology did not silence Hayes through any of the mechanisms that appear in popular depictions of cult control. There were no locked rooms. There were no armed guards. There were no dramatic confrontations in which Hayes was physically prevented from recording his lines. The control was structural, bureaucratic, and above all, normal-looking. It operated through representatives and publicists and organizational decision-making processes that, from the outside, resemble the ordinary business operations of any large institution. The banality of the control is its most disturbing feature. It suggests that the line between a legitimate organization managing its members' professional affairs and a coercive institution suppressing its members' autonomy is not always visible, even to the member being managed. But the show was not finished exploring the territory where secret knowledge and psychological suffering intersect. In 2011, it would produce an episode that reframed the entire concept of conspiracy thinking, not as an intellectual error or a failure of critical reasoning, but as a form of addiction, a compulsive behavior that masquerades as enlightenment. And it would locate the secret society not in a church, not in a government agency, not in a Lovecraftian cult operating in a small town's shadows, but inside the deteriorating mental landscape of its own central character. October 5th, 2011, Season 15, Episode 8. The title is Asperger's, a deliberate and characteristically crude phonetic play on the condition formerly known as Asperger's syndrome, a play on words that the show uses to lower the audience's expectations for what kind of episode this will be. Those expectations will be comprehensively violated. The episode is a direct sequel to You Are Getting Old, which had aired as the mid-season finale of Season 15 several months earlier. In that earlier episode, Stan Marsh celebrates his 10th birthday and begins to perceive everything around him as literally composed of excrement. Music that he previously enjoyed now sounds like flatulence. Movies that he previously found entertaining now appear on screen as feces. His parents' conversations, the interactions between his friends, the entire sensory landscape of his daily life is transformed into garbage. The condition is played for dark comedy within the episode, but the underlying metaphor is unmistakable. Stan is experiencing clinical depression. He has lost the ability to derive pleasure, meaning, or value from the things that previously gave his life structure and purpose. Asperger's picks up where You Are Getting Old left off, without reversing or softening the earlier episode's conclusion. Stan is still depressed. He still perceives the world as excrement. He goes through the motions of daily life, attending school, interacting with his friends, eating meals with his family, but he does so without engagement, without interest, without the basic experiential reward that makes routine tolerable. He is functional but empty, a condition that will be recognizable to anyone who has experienced depression or watched someone they care about experience it. And then he is approached by a group of men who call themselves the Secret Society of Cynics. They approach Stan not in a shadowy alley or an underground bunker, but in a perfectly ordinary location, which makes the approach more unsettling rather than less. They tell Stan that his condition, his perception of the world as garbage, is not a disease that needs to be treated. It is not a dysfunction that needs to be corrected. It is enlightenment. It is clarity. It is the ability to see the world as it actually is, stripped of the comfortable illusions that allow everyone else to get through the day. He is not sick, everyone else is deluded. He alone, among all the people he knows, is seeing the truth. The secret society of cynics operates out of an underground headquarters styled after the resistance base in The Matrix, with deliberate visual and narrative parallels that the show does not attempt to disguise. The members wear long dark coats. They speak in hushed, urgent tones that imply constant danger and constant vigilance. They have banks of monitors displaying real-time data about consumer culture, media manipulation, advertising psychology, and political propaganda. They are, in every visual detail, every narrative convention, and every piece of dialogue, a classic secret society. They possess hidden knowledge, they recruit selectively, they maintain strict operational security. They believe they are engaged in a war against a vast and pervasive system of control that the general public cannot perceive. The hidden knowledge they possess is that everything is garbage. That is the entirety of their doctrine. There is no deeper revelation waiting at higher levels of initiation. There is no actionable intelligence that could be used to change the world or improve anyone's condition. There is no plan, no strategy, no endgame. Their secret is cynicism itself. The unmediated and unfiltered perception that reality is composed of garbage and that anyone who claims to enjoy any aspect of it is either lying to themselves or has not yet developed the perceptual acuity to see through the illusion. And the initiation ritual, the mechanism by which new members are brought into the fold and their perception permanently aligned with the group's, is a shot of whiskey. The alcohol does not enhance perception. It numbs the disgust enough to allow the cynics to function in a world they find repulsive while maintaining their conviction that their repulsion is the correct response to objective conditions. This is, by a considerable margin, the most sophisticated argument South Park has ever constructed about the nature and appeal of secret societies. It takes the concept of secret knowledge and strips it of every external trapping, every dramatic element, every narrative convenience that makes secret societies seem exotic or thrilling or romantic. There is no charismatic leader manipulating the cynics. There is no ancient doctrine they are preserving. There is no enemy they are fighting. There is only a group of people who share a perception and have organized around it, constructing an identity from their shared displeasure and defending that identity against anyone who suggests that the displeasure might be symptomatic rather than diagnostic. The episode reframes cynicism as a belief system that possesses all of the structural characteristics of a cult. There is a doctrine, the world is garbage. There is an initiation, have a drink. There is a clear and heavily policed boundary between the in-group, those who see the truth, and the out-group, the deluded masses who have not yet woken up. There is a self-reinforcing internal logic that makes exit from the group nearly impossible, because anyone who leaves the secret society of cynics and begins enjoying life again is, by the group's own framework, simply proving that they have been successfully re-deluded by the system the group exists to oppose. The exit itself becomes evidence that the exiting member was not truly enlightened. This is the same closed-loop reasoning that operates in actual cults, where doubt is reinterpreted as a sign that the doubter needs more involvement rather than less. The episode also contains a subplot involving Cartman that provides a darkly comic counterweight to Stan's existential crisis. Cartman discovers that he can sell hamburgers made from his own bodily secretions, and the burgers are enormously popular. The connection between Cartman's subplot and Stan's is not immediately obvious, but it is structurally significant. Cartman's burgers succeed because consumers do not want to know what is in them. The product tastes good, and that is sufficient. The truth about the ingredients is available, in theory, to anyone who asks. But no one asks, because asking would ruin the experience. This is the show's observation about the relationship between willful ignorance and functional happiness. Sometimes not knowing is not a failure of intelligence. It is a strategy for survival, and the episode refuses to condemn that strategy entirely, even as it demonstrates its limitations. Stan's knowledge of the world's garbage nature is accurate, but it makes him miserable. The burger consumer's ignorance of Cartman's ingredients is maintained by choice, but it makes them satisfied. The show does not resolve this tension. It presents it, and the presentation is more honest than a resolution would be, because the tension between truth and happiness is not a problem that can be solved. It is a condition that must be navigated. The episode is also, beneath its satirical surface, a commentary on addiction that is more nuanced than most dramatic treatments of the subject. The whiskey is not an incidental detail, it is the mechanism. The secret society of cynics is, when stripped of its philosophical pretensions and its Matrix-inspired set design, a group of functional alcoholics who have constructed an elaborate intellectual and social justification for their drinking. They do not drink because they are sad or because they are weak or because they have a disease. They drink because they see the truth, and the truth is so unbearable that it requires chemical management. The reframing of addiction as enlightenment, of compulsive behavior as a response to superior perception, is devastatingly accurate to how many real-world communities organized around conspiracy thinking actually function. The research that pulls people into conspiracy rabbit holes, the hours spent watching videos and reading forums and accumulating evidence, is consistently described by its practitioners not as a compulsion, but as a process of awakening. They call it taking the red pill. They call it waking up. They call it seeing the Matrix. The language of spiritual enlightenment and intellectual liberation is used to describe a pattern of behavior that, observed from outside, looks remarkably like addiction. A compulsive cycle that consumes increasing amounts of time and energy, while progressively isolating the individual from relationships, employment, and ordinary social functioning. Stan's arc in the episode concludes with a choice that the show presents not as a triumph, but as a compromise. Not as a victory, but as a negotiation with reality. He can remain with the secret society of cynics, drinking whiskey and perceiving the world as garbage and enjoying the identity and community that shared perception provides. Or he can return to Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny and accept the possibility that his enjoyment of their company and their shared activities might be a delusion, a comfortable fiction his brain constructs to make an intolerable reality tolerable. He chooses to go back. He returns to his friends. They watch a movie together. The movie, by any objective standard, is not good. Stan knows it is not good. He can still perceive its specific deficiencies, its lazy writing and its derivative plotting and its pandering sentimentality. But he also perceives something the cynic's framework cannot account for. The experience of watching a mediocre movie with people you care about is not garbage. The shared attention, the physical proximity, the unspoken agreement to spend time in each other's company even when the activity itself is unremarkable, has a value that cynicism cannot measure, because cynicism only measures the object, never the context. There is something else in this episode that most analyses overlook. A detail so small it seems insignificant, but is in fact the key to the entire argument. The whiskey works. That is the crucial point. The alcohol genuinely makes Stan feel better. It genuinely allows him to function. The secret society of cynics is not wrong about the practical effectiveness of their solution. They are wrong about what their solution means. They interpret the efficacy of alcohol as proof that the world requires chemical buffering because the world is objectively unbearable. But the show suggests an alternative interpretation. The alcohol works not because it helps Stan see through an illusion, but because it reduces the anxiety that is preventing him from engaging with reality on its own terms. The cynics have mistaken the symptom for the disease and the palliative for a sacrament. Their entire philosophy is built on a pharmacological misunderstanding, and the fact that they have constructed an elaborate quasi-religious institution around this misunderstanding is itself the show's most damning commentary on how secret societies form. They do not start with a lie, they start with a partial truth, a truth that is real enough to be convincing but incomplete enough to be dangerous. And the gap between the partial truth and the full truth is where the institution builds its cathedral. Asperger's is the pivot point in South Park's long and sustained engagement with the subject of secret societies, because it relocates the secret society from the external world to the internal one. Every previous episode in this investigation placed the conspiracy or cult or dangerous institution outside the protagonist. Blaintology was an organization Stan could walk away from. Scientology was a church Kyle could leave. The 9/11's conspiracy was a theory Kyle could abandon. The Cthulhu cult was a group Kenny's parents had joined voluntarily, however recklessly. The secret society of cynics is different. It is a state of mind that presents itself as a community. And the episode argues, through Stan's struggle and his eventual incomplete resolution, that this is the most dangerous kind of secret society. Because you cannot walk away from a community that exists inside your own perception. The building is your own brain, and there is no door. The years that followed Asperger's would bring South Park into collision with the largest and most consequential real-world event of the early 21st century. And the show would respond not with a single episode or even a two-part arc, but with a conspiracy narrative that sprawled across multiple seasons and multiple streaming specials, tangling real-world pandemic politics with the show's own internal mythology in ways that tested the limits of what a weekly animated comedy could accomplish. The connection between the show's internal mythology and the real world had never been as tangled as it was about to become. Every previous Secret Society episode had maintained a clear separation between the fictional world of South Park and the real world the show was commenting on. Even the 200 and 201 crisis, while it involved real threats from real people, played out as a conflict between the show and external forces. What came next was different. What came next blurred the line between the show's fictional conspiracies and real-world events to a degree that neither the creators nor the audience had anticipated. What came next was the pandemic. The story begins as an improbable number of South Park stories begin, with Randy Marsh doing something deeply irresponsible. October 2nd, 2019. Season 23, Episode 2, Banned in China. The episode follows two parallel storylines. In one, Stan's band is offered a recording contract but must modify their creative output to satisfy the Chinese government's censorship requirements in order to access the Chinese market. In the other, Randy Marsh travels to China to expand the market for his marijuana business, Tegrity Farms. Banned in China is not on its surface an episode about secret societies or conspiracies. It is an episode about economic complicity, about the compromises that Western individuals and corporations make in exchange for access to the Chinese consumer market. But it establishes narrative elements that become critical to the show's most ambitious conspiracy storyline. It places Randy Marsh in China. It establishes that Randy is willing to engage in morally questionable behavior when financial incentives are sufficiently large. It positions him as a character whose judgment is reliably compromised by the intersection of ambition and opportunity. And it sets up, without any indication that the setup is occurring, the single most consequential narrative revelation in South Park's pandemic arc. Randy Marsh's character arc across the series provides essential context for understanding the pandemic revelation. Randy began the show as a minor background character, Stan's well-meaning but unremarkable father. Over the course of 23 seasons, he evolved into the show's primary vehicle for depicting adult male foolishness, impulsiveness, and the particular kind of irresponsibility that comes from believing you are smarter than your circumstances. Randy has started a boy band. He has fought other parents at Little League games. He has become addicted to cooking shows, to the internet, and to alcohol. He has convinced himself that he is a geologist, a musician, a chef, a revolutionary, and a visionary entrepreneur, often within the same episode. Every one of these ventures shares a common structure. Randy overestimates his own competence, underestimates the complexity of the situation, and generates consequences that expand far beyond what he anticipated or can control. The pandemic revelation is the logical endpoint of this character arc. It is what happens when Randy's particular combination of arrogance and incompetence intersects with global consequences, instead of merely local ones. On September 30th, 2020, South Park aired the pandemic special. The special was produced under active pandemic conditions, with Parker and Stone working from separate locations and the animation team operating with reduced staff. The visual quality of the special reflected these constraints. The pacing was different from a typical South Park episode. Slower, more deliberate, less frenetic. The usual manic energy of the show, the breakneck pace at which jokes arrive and plot lines multiply, was replaced by something closer to exhaustion. This tonal shift was not entirely a creative choice. It was an accurate reflection of the conditions under which the special was produced and the conditions under which its audience was living. The pandemic special reveals, within its narrative, that Randy Marsh is responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic. During his trip to China, depicted in Banned in China the previous year, Randy had sexual encounters with a bat and a pangolin in Wuhan. Mickey Mouse, representing the Walt Disney Company's extensive financial entanglements with the Chinese market, was present and may have participated. The virus that resulted from these encounters spread from Randy to the broader population, and ultimately around the world, causing the global pandemic that had, at the time the special aired, killed more than 1 million people and fundamentally disrupted every aspect of daily life on the planet. The revelation is deliberately, almost aggressively absurd. It is meant to be absurd, but the absurdity is precisely calibrated to serve a specific argumentative purpose. The real-world debate about the origins of COVID-19, whether the SARS-CoV-2 virus jumped naturally from animals to humans through a wet market or escaped through a biosafety failure at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, had become intensely and bitterly politicized by September of 2020. South Park's explanation that a Colorado marijuana farmer had sexual contact with exotic animals during a business trip while an anthropomorphic corporate mascot watched is more absurd than either real-world hypothesis. But the show uses this absurdity to make a point about the nature of origin stories and the psychological function they serve. The fixation on the origin of the virus, whether it came from a wet market or a laboratory or a Colorado farmer's questionable decisions, is presented by the show as itself a form of conspiracy thinking. The truth about the virus's origin, whatever it turns out to be, will not cure the virus. It will not bring back the dead. It will not restore the jobs that were lost, or the businesses that closed, or the relationships that fractured under the pressure of lockdowns and isolation. The obsessive focus on how it started is a displacement of grief, anger, and helplessness onto a narrative structure that promises the resolution of identifying a responsible party. If we can determine who started this, the logic goes, we can assign blame, and blame provides the illusion that the catastrophe was avoidable, that someone made a choice that could have been made differently, that the suffering was contingent rather than inevitable. The alternative, that a virus mutated in the chaotic intersection of human activity and animal ecology through processes that no individual controlled or intended, offers no one to blame and therefore no psychological resolution. Randy's response to the revelation is to conceal it. He destroys evidence, he deflects questions, he lies to his wife, his son, and his community. He constructs elaborate alternative explanations for his behavior. He enlists co-conspirators and threatens witnesses. He is, in every particular of his behavior, indistinguishable from the operators of the secret societies the show has spent 2 decades analyzing and criticizing. He possesses dangerous knowledge about a catastrophic event. He conceals that knowledge to protect himself from the consequences of his actions. And the concealment, as the show demonstrates across multiple episodes and specials, causes damage that compounds over time and eventually exceeds the damage the original truth would have caused if disclosed. The pandemic storyline continued through the abbreviated season 24, and then expanded into 2 streaming specials that premiered on Paramount Plus in December of 2021. South Park, Post-COVID, and South Park Post-COVID, The Return of COVID. These specials represent the show's most ambitious narrative structure, jumping forward decades in time to depict the main characters as middle-aged adults in a world still shaped by the consequences of the pandemic, and within the show's mythology, by the consequences of Randy's cover-up. The time jump structure of the post-COVID specials serves a specific argumentative function that the show's standard weekly format could not achieve. By showing the same characters across a span of decades, the specials demonstrate something about conspiracies and cover-ups that a single episode, set in a single moment, cannot convey. They demonstrate duration. They show what happens when a secret is maintained not for days or weeks, but for years and decades. The answer, the specials argue through every detail of their world building and character design, is that the secret becomes structural. It stops being something the person carries and becomes part of the architecture of their life. Every decision they make, every relationship they form, every opportunity they pursue or avoid is shaped by the gravitational pull of the concealed truth. The secret is no longer inside the person is inside the secret. The post-COVID specials are tonally unlike anything the show had produced before. They are sad in a way that South Park rarely permits itself to be. The humor is present but muted, less a series of punchlines than a pervasive tone of melancholic absurdity. Kenny is dead, not in the recurring and reversible sense that had been a staple of the show for 24 years, but permanently and irreversibly. Kyle and Stan have drifted apart, their childhood friendship eroded by decades of distance and unresolved disagreement. Cartman has, in a development the show treats with a fascinating and deliberately unresolvable combination of sincerity and deep suspicion, become an Orthodox Jewish rabbi named Eric Cartman, living in a comfortable home with a loving wife named Yentl and 3 well-adjusted children. He appears happy, he appears kind. He appears to have undergone a genuine transformation from the sociopathic child the audience knew for 24 seasons into a compassionate, community-oriented adult. The question the specials pose, and deliberately refuse to answer definitively, is whether this transformation is real or whether it is Cartman's most elaborate and longest-running manipulation. The ambiguity is the point. The specials argue that after enough time has passed, the distinction between genuine transformation and perfect performance may become meaningless, because the effects on the people around the transformed or performing individual are identical. This connects directly to the show's treatment of Mormonism, where the question of whether the beliefs are true was explicitly subordinated to the question of whether the believers are good. Cartman's Judaism in the post-COVID specials raises the same question in a different key. Does it matter if his faith is sincere, if the life it produces is indistinguishable from sincerity? The specials argue, through the contrast between the characters' childhood selves and their adult selves, that secrets maintained across decades do not merely conceal the truth. They deform the people who carry them. The weight of a secret increases with time. The energy required to maintain a cover-up grows exponentially as the circle of people affected by the concealed truth expands. Randy's pandemic conspiracy is the show's most extended and most detailed exploration of how an ordinary person, without malice or grand ambition, becomes the operator of a conspiracy. He did not set out to deceive anyone. He did not plan to create a cover-up. He did not convene a meeting of shadowy figures in a smoke-filled room and outline a strategy for information suppression. He simply did something shameful. And when the consequences of that shameful act became apparent on a global scale, he made a calculation, the same calculation made by every person who has ever chosen concealment over confession. He decided that telling the truth would cause more immediate personal harm than maintaining the lie. And then he made that same decision again the next day, and the day after that, and the week after that, until the lie was no longer a choice he was making, but a structure he was maintaining. A structure with its own momentum and its own demands and its own logic. A structure that required continuous investment of energy and credibility to sustain. This is exactly how the overwhelming majority of real-world conspiracies begin and sustain themselves, not with a mastermind's grand plan, not with an organization's institutional decision, with one person in one moment making one small and cowardly choice, and then making it again and again, until the accumulation of small cowardly choices constitutes a conspiracy by default. A conspiracy of inertia maintained not by power, but by the escalating cost of stopping. The pandemic storyline also involves Mickey Mouse as a character, and Mickey's presence is neither incidental nor purely comedic. In the show's mythology, Mickey Mouse represents corporate complicity as a structural phenomenon, the willingness of enormous economic entities to accommodate any authoritarian demand and participate in any morally questionable arrangement if the financial returns are sufficiently compelling. Mickey's involvement at the origin event of the pandemic connects the virus to the show's broader analysis of how global capitalism functions as its own form of secret society, operating not through robes and rituals and coded handshakes, but through trade agreements and market access negotiations and intellectual property deals conducted behind closed doors by people whose names the public will never learn. This is a conspiracy without conspirators in the traditional sense. No individual within the system necessarily intends the harm that the system produces. The harm is emergent, arising from the interaction of incentive structures that reward short-term profit and penalize long-term caution. The system does not require a mastermind because the system is the mastermind. Randy's cover-up also generates secondary conspiracies that compound the original deception in ways he cannot anticipate or control. He must lie to his wife Sharon, who notices inconsistencies in his behavior and his emotional state. He must lie to his son Stan, who is genetically predisposed, as the show has established over decades, to observation and uncomfortable truth-telling. He must recruit and manage co-conspirators, who then have their own secrets to maintain and their own vulnerabilities to protect. Each additional layer of deception creates new potential points of failure, new people who must be monitored and managed, new relationships that could fracture and expose the entire structure. The architecture of concealment grows geometrically, while the truth it conceals remains stubbornly singular and unchanging. One fact generates dozens of lies, and those dozens of lies generate hundreds of supporting deceptions. This is the mathematical reality of cover-ups that the show illustrates with considerable precision through Randy's increasingly desperate and increasingly absurd attempts to maintain control of a narrative that escaped his capacity to manage long before he realized it had. The pandemic arc also forces the show to confront a question it had previously been able to avoid. What happens when the person operating the conspiracy is someone the audience cares about? In every previous Secret Society episode, the operators of the conspiracy were antagonists. David Blaine was a villain. The Scientology officials were villains. The Revolution Muslim posters were villains. Even the Secret Society of Cynics, while treated with some sympathy, were ultimately presented as a cautionary example. Randy is different. Randy is a main character. Randy is Stan's father. Randy, for all his catastrophic judgment and his moral flexibility, is a character the audience has spent decades watching and, in many cases, enjoying. The show does not resolve this tension by making Randy sympathetic or by excusing his behavior. It resolves it by demonstrating that the most common and most dangerous conspiracies are not operated by people we would recognize as villains. They are operated by people we would recognize as neighbors, as family members, as ourselves. There is one more thing to say about the pandemic arc before turning to the show's final argument. The arc demonstrates that South Park's method of producing episodes in less than a week, A method that was once considered a creative limitation and a logistical curiosity was in fact the show's greatest asset during the pandemic. Because the show could respond to events within days rather than months, it was able to engage with the pandemic in real time, incorporating new developments, new controversies, and new cultural dynamics as they emerged. The show's speed became a form of transparency. While other programs were producing carefully vetted and focus-grouped content about the pandemic months after the events they depicted, South Park was reacting in something close to real time, with all the messiness and imprecision that real-time engagement implies. The show's method mirrored its message. Open systems are messy. They make mistakes, but they are responsive and adaptive in ways that closed systems with their long production timelines and their layers of institutional approval simply cannot be. And now, after 27 seasons of examining cults, dissecting conspiracies, confronting censorship, and mapping the architecture of concealment, the final question emerges. What does South Park actually believe about secret societies? What is the unified theory that connects David Blaine's card tricks to L, Ron Hubbard's e-meter to Joseph Smith's golden plates to the government's imaginary competence to the censored speech about censorship to the elder god beneath South Park? To the Church of Scientology's control over Isaac Hayes to the whiskey drinking, cynics in their basement to Randy Marsh's pangolin in Wuhan? The pattern, once you see it, is difficult to unsee. Every secret society the show has examined, without exception across more than 2 decades and hundreds of episodes, shares a single structural feature. The feature is not secrecy. Mormonism's beliefs are entirely public, and the show still treats the community with something approaching respect. The feature is not power. The secret society of cynics has no power whatsoever, no resources, no influence, no ability to affect the world outside their basement, and the show treats them as among the most dangerous groups it has ever depicted. The feature is not malice. Many of the people within these organizations, from the Mormon kid Gary Harrison, to Kenny's cult member parents to the government officials propagating 9/11's conspiracy theories, genuinely believe they are doing good, or at least doing their best. The single structural feature that unites every secret society South Park has examined is the promise that complexity can be reduced to simplicity. The promise that the overwhelming, chaotic, contradictory, frequently cruel, and always unpredictable mess of human existence can be explained, managed, and made tolerable by a single hidden truth. For the Church of Scientology, the hidden truth is the Xenu narrative and the body thetans. For the 9/11's conspiracy theorists, the hidden truth is government orchestration. For the Cthulhu cultists, the hidden truth is the existence of elder gods operating beneath the surface of ordinary reality. For the secret society of cynics, the hidden truth is that everything is garbage and always has been. For Randy Marsh, the hidden truth is what he did in China. Each of these hidden truths shares a common feature that is easy to miss precisely because it is so obvious. They are all narratives. They all have a beginning, a middle, and an implied ending. They all organize the chaos of experience into a story with identifiable characters, discernible motives, and a logical sequence of cause and effect. Xenu brought the Thetans, the government planned the attacks, the elder gods sleep beneath the world. Everything has always been garbage. Randy started the pandemic. These are not just claims about the world. They are stories about the world. And stories, by their very nature, impose order on disorder. They take the incomprehensible and make it comprehensible. They take the random and make it meaningful. They take the frightening and make it manageable. Because a story, no matter how terrifying its content, is always less frightening than the absence of story. This is the deepest insight in the show's 27-year investigation. Secret societies are not selling knowledge. They are selling narrative. They are selling the most fundamental human need, more fundamental than food or shelter or companionship. The need to believe that experience has structure, that events have meaning, that actions have consequences that correspond in some recognizable way to the moral character of the actors. The need, in short, for story. And the show argues that this need is so powerful, so deeply wired into human cognition, that people will accept almost any narrative rather than face the possibility that there is no narrative at all. In every single case, the hidden truth is less frightening than the alternative. Because the alternative is that there is no hidden truth, that the world is exactly as complicated, contradictory, random, and uncontrolled as it appears to be on its surface, that no one is in charge, that suffering is distributed without pattern or purpose, that good people get sick and die while bad people prosper and live to old age, and there is no cosmic accounting system keeping score, that the universe is not a conspiracy with a discoverable structure. It is a mess with no author, no outline, and no ending. South Park has argued with remarkable consistency across nearly 3 decades of weekly production that the human inability to tolerate this messiness is the primary engine that drives every secret society, every cult, every conspiracy theory, and every authoritarian institution ever created. People do not join cults because the cult's leader is uniquely charismatic. They join because the cult's narrative is simpler than reality, and simplicity is a relief. People do not spread conspiracy theories because the evidence supporting the theories is uniquely compelling. They spread them because the alternative, that terrible events have mundane causes, and that no one is responsible in the satisfying and narratively complete way that responsibility usually implies, is psychologically unbearable. People do not submit to authoritarian institutions because they enjoy obedience or because they lack the intelligence to recognize what is happening to them. They submit because obedience relieves them of the burden of navigating a world that offers no clear rules, no reliable authorities, and no guaranteed outcomes. Consider what the show has accomplished when you lay these 10 investigations end to end. It has examined a fictional cult and found the same psychological mechanisms at work as in a real church. It has examined a real church and found the same recruitment dynamics as in a fictional cult. It has examined a political conspiracy theory and found the same emotional needs driving it as drive religious faith. It has examined a real act of censorship and found the same power dynamics at work as in the fictional conspiracies it had satirized. It has examined a Lovecraftian cosmic horror and found the same interpersonal dynamics as in a suburban cover-up. It has examined a pandemic conspiracy and found the same cowardly calculations as in a grade school bathroom mystery. The subjects are different, the contexts are different, the stakes range from trivial to global, but the human behavior is identical in every case. The need for simplicity, the willingness to surrender autonomy, the inability to tolerate randomness, the preference for a frightening narrative over no narrative at all. This is not a coincidence, and the show does not treat it as one. South Park argues, through the accumulated weight of these investigations, that secret societies are not aberrations. They are not pathologies afflicting a small segment of the population. They are expressions of a universal human tendency, a tendency as fundamental as hunger or sexual desire, or the need for sleep, the tendency to seek pattern in noise, meaning in chaos, and agency in randomness. Every human being alive carries this tendency, and every secret society that has ever existed, from ancient mystery cults to modern conspiracy communities, has exploited it. The show itself functions as the structural antithesis of every institution it examines. South Park does not offer a unified theory of anything. It contradicts itself frequently and without apology. It praises the moral character of Mormons in one episode and mocks their beliefs in the same episode. It sympathizes with conspiracy theorists while systematically dismantling their arguments. It is simultaneously the most cynical show on American television, treating nothing as sacred and no institution as beyond ridicule, and the most idealistic, built on the foundational belief that ordinary people are capable of thinking for themselves if the information is presented honestly. It believes that humans can handle the truth. It also believes that most humans would rather not. This contradiction is not a flaw in the show's philosophy. It is the philosophy. Secret societies offer certainty. South Park offers ambiguity. Secret societies say, here is the truth, now stop asking questions and start following instructions. South Park says, here's a question, now go look for your own answers and do not trust anyone who claims to have found them for you. Secret societies are closed systems, internally coherent but ultimately brittle because they cannot accommodate new information that contradicts their foundational narratives. South Park is an open system, messy and contradictory, and frequently wrong, but resilient because it can absorb new information, new perspectives, and even its own failures without collapsing. The show has also demonstrated through painful real-world experience that openness has costs that cannot be wished away or minimized through clever argumentation. The Muhammad episodes proved that transparency about certain subjects can provoke credible threats of lethal violence. The Isaac Hayes situation proved that exposing the inner workings of a secret society can cost you relationships with people you genuinely care about. The pandemic storyline proved that some truths, once uncovered, cannot be recovered, and that living with uncovered truth is not always easier or more pleasant than living without it. Openness is not free. It is expensive, and the show has never pretended otherwise. But the show's final argument, the argument that runs as a continuous thread beneath every episode about every cult and every conspiracy and every secret society across 27 seasons and multiple feature-length specials, is that the cost of openness is always in every case and without exception lower than the cost of concealment. Because concealment compounds, every secret maintained requires another secret to protect it. Every lie requires a supporting lie. Every piece of hidden information creates a vulnerability that must be defended with additional layers of secrecy. The architecture of concealment grows and grows until it collapses under its own structural weight. And when it collapses, as it always eventually does, because every closed system eventually encounters a piece of reality it cannot absorb or deflect or reinterpret, the damage inflicted by the collapse is always greater, often catastrophically greater, than the damage that would have resulted from telling the truth at the beginning. The Church of Scientology's efforts to suppress information about its beliefs and practices have resulted in more public awareness of those beliefs and practices than any advertising campaign could have generated. The censorship of episodes 200 and 201 transformed 2 episodes of a cable cartoon into the most discussed and most analyzed pieces of television in the show's history. Randy's cover-up of the pandemic's origin caused more damage to his family and his community than the original revelation would have caused. In every case the show examines, across every context and every scale of consequence, the same principle holds. The cover-up is worse than the crime. The secret is more destructive than the truth. The closed system is more fragile than the open one. There is a particular kind of courage in this argument that is easy to overlook because the show packages it inside vulgarity and absurdity. The courage is not in mocking powerful institutions. Many shows mock powerful institutions. The courage is in refusing to replace the demolished certainties with new ones. Most satirical works operate by tearing down one set of beliefs and implicitly advocating for another. They mock the right from the left, or the left from the right, or faith from the position of reason, or reason from the position of faith. They always have a position, an alternative on offer, a replacement ideology waiting in the wings. South Park does not. It tears down Scientology without advocating for atheism. It tears down conspiracy theories without advocating for institutional trust. It tears down cynicism without advocating for optimism. It operates in the uncomfortable space between demolition and construction, the space where the old building has been razed but no new building has been erected. And the audience is left standing in an open field with nothing but their own judgment to guide them. This is uncomfortable. It is meant to be. The discomfort is the curriculum. This is why South Park has endured as a cultural institution when so many of its contemporaries have faded or been forgotten. Not because it is funny, though it is frequently and devastatingly funny. Not because it is outrageous, though it has consistently pushed the boundaries of what broadcast and cable television will tolerate. Not because it is always right, because it is often wrong, sometimes spectacularly wrong, about the specific subjects it addresses. South Park has endured because it tells a truth about the human relationship to truth itself. It understands that people are drawn to secrets not because secrets are powerful, but because a world without secrets, a world where everything is visible and nothing is hidden, and no one is in charge, is more frightening than any conspiracy could ever be. And it argues, with the accumulated weight and authority of hundreds of episodes and decades of sustained cultural engagement, that the frightening world is the real one. That the secret society promising to explain everything is always lying, because the world does not have an explanation. That the willingness to live without explanation, to sit with uncertainty, to tolerate the mess without reaching for the comforting fiction that someone somewhere is pulling the strings, is not a weakness or a failure of nerve. It is the only form of intellectual and emotional freedom that actually functions in a universe that was not designed to make you comfortable. The show has been saying the same thing for 27 years. It has said it through the story of a street magician, and a personality test, and a pair of golden plates and a urinal, and a censored speech and an elder god, and a dead chef and a glass of whiskey and a pangolin. It has said it through 4 boys who never age in a town that never learns, and a world that keeps generating new variations of the same old con. The message has not changed because the human condition it describes has not changed. People want to be told what is going on. People want to be told that someone knows. People want to be told that the chaos is not chaos at all but a plan, and that the plan, however sinister, at least means that something is in charge. And the show keeps saying, with patience and with humor and with a kind of furious tenderness, that no one is in charge, that the desire to be told otherwise is the vulnerability that every con artist, every cult leader, every conspiracy theorist, and every authoritarian institution has exploited since the beginning of human civilization, and that the only honest response to a world without a plan is to make your own, knowing it might be wrong, knowing it will certainly be incomplete, and proceeding anyway because the alternative is to hand your plan to someone who claims to have a better one and never does. A street magician performs a card trick on a corner in South Park, Colorado. The crowd watches. They do not care about the trick. They care about what the trick represents. The possibility that someone has access to knowledge they do not. The show watches the crowd. It has been watching the crowd since 1997. It watched the crowd when Blaine pulled his card. It watched the crowd when Tom Cruise locked himself in a closet. It watched the crowd when Joseph Smith put his face in a hat. It watched the crowd when Kyle made his presentation about 9/11. It watched the crowd when Comedy Central bleeped the speech about threats. It watched the crowd when Kenny died for the 1000th time. It watched the crowd when Chef sang his last song. It watched the crowd when Stan took his first drink with the Cynics. It watched the crowd when Randy lied about what he did in China. Every time the crowd wanted the same thing: an explanation, a key, a hidden truth that would make the chaos cohere. And every time the show said the same thing in a different voice from a different angle, but always the same thing. There is no key. There is no hidden truth. There is no secret handshake that opens the door to understanding. There is no password, no initiation, no level of clearance that will finally make everything make sense. There is only the world, as it is, without a narrator, without a script, without a plan. And for 27 seasons, the show has been asking the same question, the only question that ultimately matters. What are you so afraid of finding out? If any part of this stayed with you, if anything in these 10 chapters made you see the show or the world a little differently than you did before you pressed play, subscribing to this channel is the single best way to make sure we keep going. It is free, it takes a moment, and it means more than you might think.